Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock, and I will call this City Council workshop of August 24th, 2022 to order. I'm presiding today on behalf of Mayor Severns. This will be both a physical meeting and a virtual meeting. A number of city staff and consultants are participating via teleconference. Guests that are included in staff presentations will be excused from the Ring Central meeting at the conclusion of the agenda item as appropriate. Today's meeting may be viewed live on our YouTube channel and on cable channel 10 HD 1090. We do anticipate one action item on today's agenda, so I will have Julie, our city clerk, call the roll.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Munns.
Present.
Councilmember Stuckey.
Present.
Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
Present.
Councilmember Evans.
Present.
Councilmember Marshall.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Wiesner has let us know that he will not be in attendance today.
Do we need a motion to excuse Wiesner since it's just a workshop?
For a workshop, no motion is needed.
Thank you. Okay, first up on our agenda is a community partner presentation and a windmill update. Brian Jones of the Oak Harbor Rotary will present. Oh no, he's unfortunately, I see the cross, unfortunately not able to be with us as scheduled. His presentation will be rescheduled to a later date, but I understand that our Public Works, Steve Schuler, will do some information, have some information to share with us about the complexity of permitting, budgeting, and scheduling of the project. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Council. Yeah, I'm just going to give some brief comments, and you're right. We were planning a presentation by the Rotary Club. There was a family emergency this morning. It does look like we have another Rotary Club member here if we want to engage in some of that process. And so we're very excited to move forward with it. We have great meetings. I'm going to be very honest with you. When I hear about a volunteer group that wants to do a project of this scale and magnitude, I check them out, and I've been very impressed. As you know, many of you know, these are really community leaders, professionals, very impressive to work with them. Having said that, even if it was my own engineering group or a consultant who was giving me a schedule and a budget, I'm going to analyze it very carefully, and so I want to give Council a heads up. So the Rotary Club has produced a draft schedule, and it looks very good, but we do know that the proposed structure is going to go inside the floodplain, the 100-year federal FEMA floodplain. Normally, there's a giant wall of federal and state regulations that you have to get over, and we can't control that. You have to go through it. Normally, working with our amazing planning department, they will help the applicant get through that process, but going through that, we can end up getting federal and state agencies that will have interest. We can get tribes that will have interest in this. We can have local environmental groups that will get interested because of that, and that is outside of our control. So what I'm trying to say is that I would tell you that the schedule that is proposed could very well slip. It may not slip, but it could very well slip just because of putting a structure in the floodplain, and there'll be interest in the habitat and the endangered species impacts, which we have to address. The applicant needs to turn in some information on that as part of our permitting process. So that's the one thing I just kind of wanted to say. And then I was going to sit down, and then we were going to have the Rotary Club, go over the presentation. And I don't know, Mr. Fulton, okay, so I know he very kindly came here today just to see if there's any additional questions. But what we're planning to do is we're going to reach out to the Rotary Club we already have and reschedule for them to come at their convenience. And give the presentation. But we do have a lot of good information from them in the packet, so certainly willing to ask any questions. And Gideon Kaufman has done an amazing job. I think what's happening with Gideon is he's so good, everyone just hands him new things, and he keeps saying yes, and so he's immature in his understanding of how to do project management, but he's really growing a lot, and so he's just an amazing asset to the city, obviously. Yes. That was it for this right now, and we'll postpone the rest for later if that's what Council would like.
Do we have any questions from council before we let Steve? Go ahead. Mr. Stuckey.
I just want to check, because it's not inappropriate. Mr. Larson, do you have anything to add? I know you've involved somewhat with it, and I would don't want.
I only found out this morning that Mr. Jones was not going to be able to make his presentation. I'm not ready to do that because I hadn't heard, but I would agree with everything that he says about it. There's a lot of people working very diligently on the project. It is being scrutinized by a lot of eyes, and we really want this to go forward for the benefit of the community, and a lot of community leaders
Excellent. Thank you so much for all you do.
Any other questions? Councilmember Munz, did I see your hand? No? I'm just trying to ask some questions. Okay. Okay. All right, moving on. Public Works, we have a utility rate study update. Finance Director Dave Goldman and Public Works Director Steve Shula will present this along with Steve Gonzalez and John Ghilarducci of the FCS Group. Go ahead, Mr. Schuler.
Hi. So yes, we do have Chris Gonzalez with FCSG Group, and he is online, and so he's got a PowerPoint presentation, and so I assume that will come up here in any minute. I don't know. Good question. I think if you could. Well, I can tell you what, I can begin my introduction without the PowerPoint, and you'll see that it's so, oh, go ahead. Oh, perfect timing. Very good, thank you. So, Mr. Gonzalez, do you want to just do the first slide and the overview of tonight's presentation before we get to my introduction?
I'm sorry, were you talking to me, Steve?
Yeah, just that first slide, that just so council can kind of see the overview of tonight's talk.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so tonight we are talking about the utility rate study. As the previous slide suggested, we'll provide an introduction and some background, and then get into discussions about the system development charges, and then financial plans for each of the utilities: water, sewer, solid waste, and storm drain. The last bullet says questions and discussion. And I mean, for that one, you can ask the questions as they come up. We don't have to wait until the end. And I have with me John Ghilarducci, who is principal on the project and president of FCS Group. I'm Chris Gonzalez. I am the manager of the current rate study.
Very good. All right. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction for council. And the example I'm going to use is the $150 million clean water facility, which council is very aware of, and so is the community. You know, a lot of that design started sometime around 2013. I know there was a lot of discussions probably even before then, but let's just use 2013 when things really got serious. And then that project was completed in 2018. So what I'd like council to think of that plant is really two different plants. One plant was built to replace the existing plant and to provide the new technology that protects the Puget Sound and meets all the new regulations. And that plant was for everyone who lived here in 2013. So that was the replacement plant. And that should be paid for by the existing rate customers. That is their fair share. Then another portion of the plant, I want you to think of it as a separate plant. It was built empty. And it is built really for all the customers that have come to the city since 2013 up until today, and for many years beyond today for those customers that will continue to hook up to their plant. And those new customers should pay their fair share. So a lot of tonight's presentation is going to be about those two concepts. Now, as a new person coming to the city, knowing the city this size, knowing that what we paid for the plant, we have those numbers from 2018, I was expecting to see over $700,000 per year coming in from new growth. That would be my expectation as a fair share. Without knowing any numbers, just as a general rule of thumb, understanding what the plant cost, how many new growth we have. Over the last several years, we have received over less than $100,000 every single year for the last several years. So this adds up to millions of dollars that is basically being paid for only by the existing citizens and the existing businesses. So what's your current structure right now, which has been in place, those calculations have been in place since 1996. So this has not been updated for a long time. And so this is going to create some issues tonight that we're going to talk about, right? And so this is a big deal because, again, the systems that are in place for our city have been in place since 1996. And I can tell you, with someone that's been in the utility business for 30 years, the most important thing about utilities, think of utilities as a big ship. you can't just turn them quickly, but the most important thing is to get them going in the right direction. Because in every day, you're going in the right direction. That pays for itself over and over again. So that's what tonight is about, is really making sure the council can take a look at this process and make sure that the city is heading in the direct direction from today forward. So again, we have what the existing customers should pay for, and we have what the new growth should pay for. Now, this is a big issue because right now, you will see from Chris, who's going to go over these numbers, we have a very low connection charge. And so what's happening is the existing citizens and businesses, like I said, are not only paying for their portion of the plant, they're paying 100%, every single other dime, for the new growth that's coming in. So the new growth is paying, in essence, nothing. They're just getting a free ride into the plant for the last 10 years. And if nothing changes, that will continue to happen. So obviously that would have an impact the affordability. If you're an existing business and an existing home, your affordability is being impacted every single day because of that. Now let's step over to the other side. You're a developer and you came into Oak Harbor and you went to look at what it would cost you to develop a property, and you're in that process, and you look at what our fee is, and that fee's from 1996, and you do your pro forma, all of a sudden, you'll see that the proposal for the fair share is substantially higher than it was in 1996. So you'll see the recommendation from FCSG Group of a substantial increase. So it'll be important for council to understand and to work with your city attorney, Hillary Evans, and others to make sure that we give proper notice to developers of these proposed changes. And also council will want to consider, and Chris is going to go over it, maybe there's some sort of phasing that council wants to consider. Right, so that the current developers that are in a certain part of their process have time to react to these changes, right? And they're just not kind of caught all of a sudden with catching up after 26 years right in the middle of their project. So that's going to be the other side of the discussion you're going to hear tonight. I just wanted to give this overview so as Chris kind of gets in the details, just that concept of fair share is what we're looking for. We want the existing customers to pay their fair share, and we want the new growth to pay their fair share. Now, Financial Services Consulting Group is awesome. They do this for hundreds of clients all over the Northwest and parts of the United States. And so they do not want us to charge more than our fair share to the developers. Because why? Because we'd get sued and we'd lose. So they're very good at being appropriately conservative in their analysis and making sure that we're charging the right amount. And I'm really excited for you to hear the presentation. So the remainder of the slides is going to be from Chris and also our Finance Director, David Goldman, and I really look forward to you getting into that. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's talk SDCs. Let's go to the next slide, please. The SDC is a connection charge that's imposed on development to recover an equitable share of costs. So RCW 3592025 allows cities to impose connection charges based on a proportionate share of the cost of the system. And that cost includes both the cost of existing assets as well as future capital projects. And though it's not the primary purpose of the SDC, by imposing the SDC, the city gets a source of funding for capital projects and/or debt service. And so the general methodology, there are various ways you can compute it, but the way that we've done it is shown here. So there's the total cost existing and future divided by existing customers and future growth, or the total capacity of the system. And this is called an average cost approach. And so there are a number of steps involved, including defining the cost of the existing system, calculating interest as allowed by statute, defining the capital improvement plan, and then also determining what the system's capacity is. And then as the little side note says, we ultimately want to include only the cost that the utility funded. So we're not charging developers for amounts that the city didn't fund, such as what other developers paid or grants that helped offset what the city had to pay. So we're really focusing on that city investment. And so the SDC calculation right here, it kind of summarizes, the top table summarizes the charge per equivalent unit, and then the bottom table shows what that means for various connection sizes. And so that we can see for the water charge, we have a total cost basis of about $55 million. And then the system capacity and equivalent units is about $10,135. And so, we're calculating a maximum charge of $5,471 per equivalent unit, and then the city is imposing a charge of $3,081. So it's roughly $2,400 increase in the water SDC. Sewer, there's a much bigger difference, as Steve suggested. We're looking at about $89 million is our net cost basis. That includes a significant chunk of the cost of the clean water facility, but it also deducts the outstanding debt principal on the basis that customers, when they connect to the system, they'll pay for their share of that cost through rates. So we're not going to charge development, for a share of costs that are going to be paid for through rates at a later time. And so looking at the capacity that the clean water facility can accommodate based on phase 2, gets us about roughly 9,700 equivalent units that the system can serve. And so we divide that 89 million by the 9,681, and we get a maximum charge of $9,200 per equivalent unit, compared to the $1,680 that the city is currently charging. And both of those charges are imposed based on meter size and industry standard meter equivalents. And so, as you can see in the table below, the charges scale up with meter size. So if you're an 8-inch connection, you're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, in this SDC. So not that those kinds of connections come across all that often, but at the very least, just understand what this means for different types of development. And especially once you get out of 3/4 inch kind of typical single family development, there are real dollar impacts associated with this, both to what developers pay or don't pay, and then also the city, what it collects and what it can use to offset those costs that otherwise will fall to existing ratepayers. And then the storm drain charge is shown there. There isn't one currently, but basically the system cost is about $6.3 million, including both existing assets and then the future capital plan. And the land capacity would enable you to serve about 16,700 ERUs. And so then you do the simple division there, and you get a charge of about $377 per ERU. And then for the purpose of calculating the charge, a single family home is assigned 1 ERU, so they would pay $377. And then other types of development are, you take the measured impervious area and divide by 3,300 square feet of impervious surface area. And that's currently how the city defines an ERU based on the impervious footprint of a typical single family home. And that value varies by community. Just, so I've seen it as low as 2,000. I've seen it as high as 3,900 square feet, or potentially even more than that. But that's basically what will define what a particular parcel will pay for the storm drain charge. I'll pause for a second. Are there any questions on the calculation of the SDC? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I think this will show some comparables. And we see Oak Harbor's existing charges puts it pretty much at the bottom of the spectrum. Basically just under $4,800 for water and sewer service with no storm drain charge. And then the updated charges would bring you sort of to the upper middle of the range at $15,000. And this is if you were to impose the full SDCs. You certainly have the discretion to phase it in or even impose charges that are less than the maximum. Just the key thing to be aware of is the less you recover from development, the more you recover from existing ratepayers. But you can see, even with the full existing charges, Bremerton is slightly higher than that. Anacortes is about 20% higher than that. And then Bonnie Lake is also at the top end of the spectrum here. And we tried to pick utilities that were either relatively comparable in terms of geographic area or population, just for scale. Just looking at the various charges, it's important to recognize, the ones at the bottom of the table. a number of them have not updated their charges in years. I mean, I want to say, I think Marysville, their charges have been around since 2005. And, you start looking at like Burlington and Mount Vernon, and, they've got some charges. I mean, you see Mount Vernon doesn't have a storm drain SDC either. And I think their charges are, looking at roughly, 2011, as to when those were put in place. So, a number of these, if they were adjusted for inflation by itself, would push it closer to where the updated charges are. So just that for some additional context. Any questions about this before we move on to the financial plans?
Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
Yeah, I think for me, first of all, there has been no assumptions here made with these STCs in correlation to the rest of the rates coming up here shortly. For myself, with the system development charges for new construction, it has seemed apparent for some time that an adjustment is needed in this area, especially where calculations are based on 1996 numbers. Impact fees can facilitate the provision of infrastructure improvements needed to sustain economic development and to stabilize rates into the future, meet growing housing needs, and even potentially generate more affordable housing. I guess this is the point where I feel it fair for me to give a bottom line, though. The position I would be comfortable taking here would be to match our SDCs with what Marysville currently has. But beginning to phase these in, with half of that coming in 24 months and the remaining in 36. Again, I'm only one of 7 council members here, but I think that is something that, council could possibly support. So again, that's where I'm at on this, and we will see how this goes, but thank you.
Sure. And just to confirm what you said on the front end, we have not assumed any increase to the SDCs, just recognizing this is a potentially sensitive topic. And so any increase you do to the SDCs will potentially provide more capital funding for the rate plan. Having said that, we're also looking at the near term. We're assuming a certain number of connections. I think it's roughly 80 connections per year. So, I mean, we'll get, maybe tens of thousands of dollars, maybe cracked into like, 100 or something. But yeah, it's not going to dramatically change the near-term rate forecast. But what it will do is provide funding over time so that, future rate increases are mitigated and or, the need to borrow, if there are, larger capital projects, there's a source of funding for that. So, there is a near-term impact, but it's not necessarily the key driver behind this decision. It's at the end of the day, we're trying to promote equitable cost recovery from development, not necessarily revenue generation just for its own sake.
Councilmember Stuckey has a question.
So just so I'm clear, we're talking about new development, would that also apply equally to an annex? I mean, we're looking at an annex here later. Would that also apply equally in that sort of a situation?
That's an interesting question that might be best directed at the city attorney. It might depend on the terms of the annexation. I mean, because whether the customers would have to automatically pay the SDC. I imagine that if customers or property owners are voting on an annexation, having to pay a $15,000 connection fee might play into that. So there's a possibility it might factor in, but that's not necessarily a given.
Our city administrator, Oborn, has something to say.
Yeah, in the past, we did have a property we were talking about connecting to water, and we were going to charge them the system development fee. So we've charged it to new connections. So it could be a new house, or it could be a house that doesn't have water or sewer and it was connecting. So it's my understanding, and Development Services is here, can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty certain that we've applied it to anybody who connects to the system, that system development fee.
Thank you. Councilmember Muntz.
Yeah.
Mr. Oborn, that means then there's no grandfathering in, like if it's a brand new
structure or they've never been hooked up, then whatever the current rate is at the time, that would be their SDC to connect. Like, correct?
Well, the proposal here is, Councilmember Hoffmeyer made the suggestion that we give 24 months' notice to developers that we're going to do it and then phase it in. So, but it's based upon typically it's based upon when you do your building permit. So some people, with the date coming, I guarantee you that they will make sure their building permit is done the day before the rates go up, and certainly they could do that. They can certainly take advantage of that, and I think when we talked about that, programs drive behavior and fees drive behavior. So, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to give the notice so people can kind of plan for it, with the advance notice of a material rate increase so they can plan for it. But if you but if somebody, their house can already be there and then we annex them and then they connect, they're going to pay the fee at the time that they connect.
And occasionally we've had people whose well has gone bad and they can't live in the house unless they have water. And so they pay the connection fee is my understanding. So they would pay for, as of that day, that month, that year, whatever it is, that's what they're going to pay.
Yeah, the homes that were brought on by the Navy for the PFAS issue there, the Navy didn't like. They tried to kind of get out of it, but they ultimately paid the system development fees to connect those existing homes to our water system. So yes, it does apply. It's based upon when you connect or when you do your building permit.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Go ahead, Councilor Evans.
Mr. Administrator, I think you said it best, fees drive behavior. You know, we've been struggling the past number of years with our new home construction. You know, we were averaging somewhere around 200 homes a year for a good period of time, and it dropped down to 7 at one point, and now we're just starting to come back up, and now we're going to sock them with a huge change in fees on the new home construction. My fear is that that number is going to start dropping again. For this to work, we need to fill the capacity with new homes. And if we don't have people coming in here to build because we've just jacked the rates up considerably at one time in 24 months or something of that nature, I think that we're going to see a negative effect. And that's a big concern for me. I would also think that, yes, if they have a permit for a single home, that they would already be in the rate of whatever's in at the time. And with these communities, I mean, fees drive behavior. And in these communities that are designed, I mean, they run on a budget. And that budget is determined on what they know at the time when they bring that community into play. So I hope that we're not going to destroy what we've got growing right now by jumping into this too quickly.
Well, that's ultimately the policy decision of the council that we discussed. So we're giving you the maximum that we can justify.
Yep, and I understand
to not be sued by developers, but certainly.
And my comments weren't directed at you.
Yeah.
Just using your words because they summed it up.
You're right. Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in real quick in response to that? So one thing to note is, I mean, considering all the costs of building, I mean, the SDC is a relatively small portion of that cost, particularly for residential development. And so, we have anecdotes that we could speak of where, I mean, I had a client in the city of Blaine waive their SDCs for a 5-year period. During the recession, they were trying to spur and incentivize growth, and they ended up rescinding that policy and even issuing a resolution stating that it was not effective at encouraging development to happen when it wasn't already happening. And then on the other extreme, we've got clients in kind of the Wenatchee or East Wenatchee area where business is booming and they doubled their fees and it didn't put a dent in the number of connections that were happening. So, I mean, ultimately the developers are going to develop when it makes sense for them to based on the market and what they can get for properties. So, I mean, obviously a big increase in SDCs maybe would get you some comments from the development community. But I mean, even if you see it at this comparison here, I mean, Bremerton's at 15,553. Anacortes is at 20,628. So, I mean, there might be some communities that have lower charges, but they're sort of making a policy decision with respect to how much they want to recover from development versus existing customers. Now, whether they did that explicitly or implicitly, just by choosing not to have high STCs, it could be either one. The main thing is it's not like the home price is going to go up $10,000 because the STC went up $10,000. So I just wanted to make sure that you had that context.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Do we have any other council comments, questions? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, let's move on to the financial plans. So give you a brief overview of the rate study process. There are really 3 phases. The first phase, which is included in that dashed red box, is the revenue requirement or the financial plan. This is really trying to determine how much revenue each utility needs to cover its costs. And then the next phase would be the cost of service analysis, which looks at determining how much of the revenue requirement should be paid for by single-family homes, multifamily homes, businesses, and different types of customer classes. And then the final phase is rate design, and that is once we know how much we're going to recover from each customer class, how do we set the fixed charges and the variable charges that recover the right amount of revenue? And so those are the other 2 parts of the rate study. So for today, we're going to focus on that first area in the box. So if we go to the next slide, please. So these are the key assumptions that we have baked into the financial plans. For cost inflation, we've got CPI at 2.5%. We consulted with staff to gauge relative comfort and got confirmation there. Labor, we're assuming labor cost, salaries, wages go up 3% per year. Benefits costs as an aggregate average go up at 5% per year. I will say that we have to acknowledge that, at least in the recent, months, the inflation rates have been quite a bit higher than this. So there's a bit of a guess as to how long those conditions are going to continue. I would say in general, the state issues a forecast of CPI. I mean, there's higher near-term inflation, within the current budget year, but it shows it tailing off to that longer-term average relatively quickly. I can assure you that all these projections will be wrong, but it's really sort of the best guess. And wanting to make sure that we don't overstate the inflation rates and the costs, given the sensitivity to the rate increases. We're trying to be as accurate as we can. We do work for clients all around the state and in other states, and I feel like they land on both sides of the fence on this issue. There are those that are planning to assume 5-6% inflation for the next 5 years. And then there are others that say, we have reserves, we have contingencies built into our budget. Let's assume sort of standard longer-term averages and plan for those normal conditions. And then if we come back in a few years and things start to be kind of veering further away from normal, then we recalibrate. But basically not chasing the short-term noise in planning assumptions. And so long as you have the reserves in place to handle that, that's a valid way of addressing this as well. The operating forecast in general is based on the preliminary 2023-2024 projections from staff. We compute taxes on revenues, but otherwise, we use the budget as much as possible. On the revenue side, though, I think there's one notable difference. With respect to the forecast of sales revenue, we look at recent actuals and we adjust for growth. And one of the reasons why we do that is because what we find is if a budget estimate is really, really conservative, and we use that as the basis for planning, we would tend to over-collect relative to overstate the rate increases and over-collect relative to what is actually needed. So we really want that tie between projections and reality. And it was not immaterial. I mean, the sewer utility in particular, we looked at prior year actuals plus growth, and we were, 400,000 plus higher than the previous rate study projected for 2021. So it's wanting to calibrate that revenue forecast, and that's one of the things that you'll see in our findings, that's factored in. Growth rates, we're assuming 1% per year. This came out of the comprehensive plan, and that equates to about 75 to 80 equivalent units per year. An equivalent unit basically being a single-family household. So, whether you have a few commercial connections that are bigger, or you actually have 75 to 80 single-family homes, that's roughly the level of growth that we're looking at. In terms of reserve policies, the city policy is 25% of the operating budget for water and sewer, and 20% for solid waste and storm drain, with that change being factored in at the last rate ordinance, number 1899. And you can see in the table what that means for the various reserves. So for water, we're assuming a minimum balance for 2022 of about 1.4 million, for sewer, 2.9 million. And then smaller amounts for the solid waste and storm drain utilities based on their budgets. For the purpose of our study, we are including operating expenses and debt service, but we're not including depreciation and non-cash expenses and sort of discretionary rate-funded capital transfers that could be made pretty much if the money is there, or if not, they could be delayed or adjusted. So really operating expenses and debt service as the hard costs are those that factor into those reserve benchmarks. Let's go to the next slide. So we'll focus on the water utility results first. Next slide, please. The CIP, the capital plan for water, shows the utility paying about $14.4 million in capital projects from 2022 through 2027. And most of those are main replacement projects. At about $12.9 million. There were some other small investment in reservoirs and supply-related facilities, and then some other planning costs and wet fiber projects and things like that. And then the pie chart on the right shows the funding strategy. And so about 55% of that cost, $7.9 million, is expected to come from water utility cash, be it cash generated from rates and or beginning, existing fund balances. 2.8 million comes from the cumulative reserve, which is funded by SDCs. And that reserve is used more for growth-related projects. And then 1.8 million, or about 12%, comes from the ARPA funding that you approved for the water utility. And then 2 million for grants and contributions, being primarily from the Navy for one project that the city is working on behalf of the city and the Navy, and then also grants and contributions from Anacortes for the wet fiber project. And so I think the big punchline here is, though, existing cash with these offsetting sources is enough to cover the capital costs, so there's no borrowing or anything like that needed. Let's move on to the next slide. And so what we're showing is that at existing rate levels, the revenues are going to be sufficient to cover costs through 2027. And then this also provides some capacity for the utility to fund system reinvestment for future replacement needs based on annual depreciation expense. And so, yeah, we're projecting just holding the line at the existing water rates for the next, at least for the next 3 years, because I think this study was really focusing on the 2023 through 25 planning period, but then also showing that we're not expecting any major increases in 26 and 27, or even in the years right after that. I think I forgot to mention this, but in the financial plan, we try to consider a longer term period so that we don't have surprises. So we don't want to say 0, 0, 0, and then you need a 7% increase the year after that. We want the rate increases to be moderate when they're necessary and smooth over time. Let's move on to the sewer financial plan, which I think will be of particular interest. The utility is projecting about $4.9 million in capital projects, with similarly the majority of those being main replacements at
Mr.
$3.1 million.
Can we please pause?
Was there?
We have a council
Yes.
question. Thank you. Go ahead, Councilmember Munns.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Gonzalez, when you were showing that the ARPA funding was 12% of what was happening, that's not going to last forever, and we're not going to get that money back. Won't that cause a rate increase when that money is used up?
Yes, so this is referring to specifically the 2022 through 2027 capital plan. So the ARPA funding is, represents about 12% of the capital projects during that time, the 14.4 million. We're not assuming any ongoing ARPA funding above what's already been approved.
Okay, so this is going for capital funding, which means that it keeps the ratepayers, this helps keep ratepayers at a separate thing. I'm just nervous so far. I haven't seen where it would be great just to keep it the same, but I'd rather do a little bit each year and not have all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we've got to raise it 7%, because that hurts everybody. I don't care what kind of job you have. So I'm, okay, I'll keep listening, but it just, when you throw money in from something that is a gift, I see it as a gift to help with capital funding, whatever. At some point, that money runs out. So then what do you use? I'm just,
Yes.
I'm just concerned.
And I
Thank
will
you,
say,
sir.
just to respond to that, so the ARPA funding, I think the majority of that is going toward the city's annual main replacement program, and it will be used to cover some of those costs, particularly in the next year or two. But that program, longer term, is funded by utility cash. I will say that based on the cash and investments for the water utility, it began the year with about $11 million in the capital reserve. So, I mean, there is enough cash to cover some of those costs, and eventually there will be a part where additional funding will be required from rates. I mean, if you go to the next slide, right now, this bullet that talks about funding system reinvestment based on annual depreciation. So there is capacity above current operating and debt service costs at existing rates to provide some funding for capital. Now, it's not going to be enough to cover everything that will happen in the future. I mean, as other projects become identified, we may have to raise the amount of capital funding from rates. I'll also say that if the council is more comfortable with the idea of inflationary increases, or even just doing something below inflation just to kind of keep things going gradually over time, I'm certainly not going to oppose that. I mean, even system reinvestment based on depreciation expense is not going to give you enough to fully cover capital needs. And so there's an assumption there that you may have to borrow in the future if there are big needs. And so the more cash you generate and that you have, the more robust your financial plan can be to costs that you're not anticipating.
Okay.
So I guess what I'm saying is, if you wanted to keep rates at the existing level, the projections show that will work through 2027, possibly, a few years after that.
But it won't.
And at some point, in our plan, we would sort of phase in those increases as opposed to doing 0.0007. We'd be more like, 2, just to sort of keep it steady.
Okay, but it doesn't help when Anacortes gives us a 3-month notice that they're having to do capital project improvement, and they add that, divvy it out to their customers, and so now we've been hit with an increase and we can't gift. So we don't have to do it overnight, but pretty much it's pretty fast that we have to adjust people's rates right away because you can't gift the water. But if they have capital improvements or they have other costs on the processing of the water or whatever, we have to raise the rates. We don't have a choice saying, well, sorry, we haven't planned to raise the rates, so you can't charge us. But sometimes we get very little notice. And then we have to figure out, okay, when we're going to raise them and how you cover it. So this isn't covering if Anacortes decides they need to add something, they need to improve something, they need to fix something. And they say, okay, now you're going to be paying this per whatever the unit is for your water for your city. So anyway, thank you.
Yes, and just to clarify, like, I wouldn't say, I mean, this is all within the context of the water fund and how much resource, how much cash the fund has to manage expenses that could be higher than expected. I mean, the way we would handle Anacortes, and I would say for the purpose of this forecast, the city budgets $2 million per year. And, the recent history of Anacortes's costs, they've been more like 1.7 to 1.8 million. So there's already conservatism built into the Anacortes cost estimate. But let's say that they increased it by $200,000 a year. What I'm saying here is that there's capacity right now at the current rate levels above current O&M and debt service. So if it turns out that Anacortes increased their cost to the city by $200,000 next year, that would give us less that we could use for system reinvestment, but there'd still be a cushion there where we could phase it in. It's not saying that if they put an increase in that we have to immediately hit the ratepayers with it. So, I mean, part of the financial plan is to smooth this stuff over so that if there are those kinds of changes, we can stay the course, and maybe we go from 0% to 2% per year or something like that. But it gives us the flexibility as opposed to saying, well, they did an increase of 10%, and that equates to a 4% increase for us, so we have to do that on day one.
Chris, also, this is Dave Goldman here. I did talk to Anacortes a few months ago when we got this started, and they mentioned that they don't see any kind of unusual cost being borne by the users over the next few years. Now, of course, that could change, things come up, but that's kind of what they informed me when we first started this process.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Hoffmeyer?
Yeah, Chris, thanks for speaking to that capital reserve. I think a lot of us were probably surprised to see how sizable that was. I think the room that you have in here for system reinvestment is a pretty responsible amount. And I certainly I like these numbers. I would remind the public that in the fall of 2020. I think you could look at the October 23rd South Whidbey record where it reported on this. The water rate here over this 5-year period was projected to go up another 17%. I think most of the community at the time knew that was ludicrous and unneeded. Again, these numbers are nice, but I look at that and I see room to ask, why can't we do a 1% decrease? Is there room to build, say, a 1% decrease in here possibly, Chris?
Well, I mean, based on the forecast as we have it, I mean, you possibly could do that. It would provide less money, for capital, but I mean, it might still work out. It would probably accelerate when we needed an increase, and it might still be sometime beyond 2027. I guess the only question would be, is 1% enough to move the needle for customers versus kind of the impacts that it would have to the utility?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that this is beautiful compared to the previously proposed 17% increase that, looking at that capital reserve, seems rather unneeded. So thank you.
Mr. O'Born, I noticed you had your hand up earlier. I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, he went ahead and answered
Okay.
it. I might as well mention one comment. Council made a conscious decision to use ARPA funding to buy down the rate in the short term. But yes, it'll go away and it'll have to do that. But I think with the forecast here, they're going out 5 years because we want to smooth it out. So, but ultimately, in probably 2028, when we look at the rates there, we won't have that ARPA to come down. But capital projects kind of ebb and flow. So they're not on a constant area here. Some of our pipeline replacement and such does. So it kind of ebbs and flows. And with the new plant that we have, I mean, with the sewer, that was something that we did and we're going to have for a long term. So capital isn't always constant. So we did our best forecast of the rates that we now have, and we can't really build the rates on projects that we think might happen too much because it gets speculative in that way and we can be challenged on it. So
Thank you. All right, Mr. Gonzalez, you may proceed.
All right, thank you. So then we were here, and the majority of the CIP for sewer is oriented toward mains. As far as the funding, there's grants and contributions are expected to cover about $2 million of that. I think there's a federal appropriation to help support the main replacements. The sewer fund is going to be responsible for roughly 800,000 or 16%. The cumulative reserve about roughly 700,000, and then the ARPA funding approved for the sewer utility would cover about 1.5. And again, those are the grants and contributions, the ARPA funding. That's one-time money that will help offset the 4.9 million in cost, with most of those being next year. But still, no borrowing. We expect the utility is going to have enough to cover those costs. And so then the next slide, we are showing, I know there was some interest in a possible sewer rate reduction, and we are showing that can work. Based on current cash flow, we're showing that rates could go down 3%, and you'd still be able to cover operating expenses and debt service. And so that decrease would decrease the rates from the monthly rate for a single family home from 122.07 to 118.41. Increasing the SDC could potentially enable a further rate reduction. So a significant portion of the revenue requirement is debt service. That's kind of the greenish part of the column graph toward the middle there. And so SDC revenue can be used to offset debt repayment. We typically advise against relying on it, but that being said, as the money comes in, you can bank it and use it to make the payments, at least from a cash flow perspective, to meet those obligations. And so that could potentially enable a further rate reduction if council is interested in that. The other thing you could do with that money is just continue to hold on to it for future capital investment. But you have that discretion if you increase the charge. Any questions on the sewer plan?
Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
Yeah. Again, for me, and I'll go back to that same proposed proposed rates in the fall of 2020. Over this period between now and 2027, the rates were projected to go up by $31.07 approximately. So the fact that we're sitting here looking at the fact that at least a $4.14% decrease is possible and pretty easy to get there, I think that's a great thing. I do wonder on the sewer plant here, looking at things, I do wonder if there is a little more room yet to squeeze on the operations and maintenance. It seems like there may be. And, I do wonder, on the equipment replacement, I do wonder, if we were at 200,000 a year and we're going to 600,000, I wonder if there's some room to come in the middle at, 400,000 a year on equipment replacement. Is there a way to get this decrease to be a little bigger yet while leaving that wiggle room at the top for system reinvestment, et cetera? But again, thank you very much. This looks nice.
Sure. And as you can see, this graph, unlike the water graph, you have O&M and debt service, and it's basically consuming everything. There's a little bit of, in 2022, but then, kind of hovering, after that. And so, definitely, we could justify increases if you wanted to do more rate funded capital, but I think it's kind of difficult with the amount of debt service. It's over $7 million per year. And so, but that being said, that's only for the clean water facility. You've got a collection system that needs to be maintained, and you could certainly justify some level of capital funding, through rates. And I would say one of the differences between this forecast and the other one, the one from 2020, is that forecast was assuming additional system reinvestment. For this first run, we said, let's see what the existing rates can do, maybe with a small decrease, and this is what they can do. And just understanding the current rate pressure, eventually when the current debt service drops off, that will provide you, ample capacity to start funding capital through rates. But for now, I think you could justify holding the line on that.
Councilmember Hoffmeyer?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and, you know, and probably a good point to mention this, and, you know, David Goldman could probably speak to it more, you know, but the debt service on that plant, I think, or the total debt, I think, is roughly 116 million. You know, 91 million of which is, you know, these state revolving fund loans that we will continue to push for some forgiveness on. And I think, you know, it seems like that you guys are pretty aware of where we're at, where the public's at, and, you know, what we can do in the future. I remember when we had the council retreat, I think, you know, I think David Goldman's hypothetical Whidbey News Times front page banner was, you know, debt on the clean water facility is paid off ahead of schedule. So I do think that's something that we will be able to pull off. David, do you have anything to add on that?
No, you pretty much covered it. 90 million is the state revolving fund loans, and 25.7 million is a bond we took out, which we're only paying interest on, but we'll start to kick in principal payments in about 15, 16 years. So the total annual debt payment on all those debt instruments is about $7 million a year.
Thank you. And I know at one point I had ran the math on that, and maybe yours is more accurate, but that was, I believe that was roughly $57 a month was what that cost the average ratepayer. Is that somewhat accurate?
I haven't run those numbers in a while. Yeah, Chris, did you ever get a chance to take a look at that? Like, what 7 million divided into the total operating expenses, what percentage that might look like?
I did not, but I mean, that would be an easy calculation to run.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking $120 a month and about 12 million or so, yeah, maybe in the 60s, maybe in the 60s or something, 60, 65.
Yeah, so let me just look at that real quick. So look at the current cost, 7 million is about 60% of the revenue requirement. And if we say the current rate for a residence is at 122.07, and we multiply that out, the debt would amount to about 73.41.
73.
That's a big number. Thank you. And yes, that certainly would be front page news.
For sure. Any other council questions before we continue? Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to solid waste. This one will be a little more complicated just because, well, I mean, simpler in some ways, there's no capital plan, but a little more tricky in that there are multiple services. And we took a look at the operating budgets that staff put together, assigning costs to each of the services, and tried to see how do the revenues line up with the costs. And so what we found out was that the yard waste program the yard waste rates are under recovering relative to the cost of the yard waste service. And I know the yard waste rates, the voluntary yard waste program rates, have been in place for a number of years. And so as that cost has continued to climb, a recalibration would be appropriate. And so what we are showing for the yard waste rate forecast is that there would be a 31% increase in that rate for 2023, followed by 2% per year. Before the heartburn kicks in, it'll be important to recognize that this is just one piece of the composite solid waste rate forecast. So what you'll find is that there are multiple pieces sort of shifting around, so it's really not going to be that as big of a deal as a 31% increase might first appear to be. But it'll be a $2.51 increase in the annual average monthly bill for yard waste service. And so we'll talk about, next slide would be let's see, I think it's dumpsters or roll carts. Let's go to the next slide. Dumpsters, okay. And so what we found out, the dumpster rates are pretty close to recovering their cost of service. But as the costs continue to go up over time, you'll need 1.5% types of increases, which are below the inflation that we're assuming. And so, yeah, basically holding the line on the dumpster rates. Let's go on to the next slide, which has the roll carts. And so here, what we're showing is by the yard waste rates recovering, the cost of the yard, or heading toward recovering the cost of the yard waste program, that you can actually decrease the roll cart charges. And so, here we've got about a 2% decrease, which would amount to about 48 cents per month for a typical residential bill for a 35-gallon cart. One thing we also looked at was the recycling budget that staff prepared. It equates to a monthly cost per cart of about $8.29 for 22, and then kind of as some of the increases for recycling fees go up, that gets a little bit over $9 per month per cart, and that's embedded in that 2386/2338. But basically, there'd be a small decrease for 23. It would stay flat through 25, and then we would kind of go to kind of that 1.5% type of increase thereafter to keep up with the operating costs. And so then if we go to the next slide, I think that's the aggregate summary. So looking at a roll cart for residential with the yard waste rate, kind of an annual average, we're showing that the monthly bill would go up by about $2 for 23. And then as the yard waste rate climbs up, be a kind of a couple of small increases in 24 and 25. And then longer term, we're looking at more like 50-cent increases per year to keep up with those operating costs. And the solid waste utility has a smaller margin than the other utilities because it's really all centered around the operating budget and capital outlay that's related to that, but there's not kind of a big capital plan where you have to generate cash and sit on it and then spend the money on major projects. So
Chris,
yeah.
These rates do include that 6% increase from Island County on the tipping fees, right?
Yes.
So we asked them as well for what would the increase be going forward, and they weren't really able to give us what that would be for 24 or 25. So, a large portion of the operating costs for solid waste are comprised of these tipping fees. So that is one of the things that is a little different than some of the other funds. This is a larger percentage of all the costs for solid waste as opposed to some of the other funds.
Any questions on solid waste? I think we're going to go into storm drain otherwise.
I don't see any questions. Go ahead.
Okay, right, thank you. All right, so storm drain. The CIP includes about $912,000 in projects over the 6-year planning period. It was spread pretty evenly between the categories that are shown there. We're projecting the storm drain fund has enough cash to pay for those projects. No grants or contributions, just outright fund balance can pay for those projects. No borrowing or anything needed. And then on the next slide, we show the storm drain financial plan. At this point, we've got mainly operating costs. There's a little bit of debt service associated, particularly in the early years. I think it's like $50,000 per year, if I'm remembering that correctly. And then there's some capacity for capital, system reinvestment and other reserve funding on top of that. But we're showing that the existing storm drain rate is adequate to cover O&M, debt service, and system reinvestment based on depreciation expense. So the storm drain utility is in great shape and expected to be that way, at least through the 5-year planning period, with no major increases on the horizon. But that will be driven in part by the capital plan. And so to the extent that some unanticipated capital need pops up, maybe there might be a need for increases, during the latter part or outside this period. But at this point, it looks relatively stable. And so then on the next slide, we have the aggregate single-family bill comparison, and we see that Oak Harbor, the existing rates put you at the top of the comparison. And this is the same group that we looked at for the SDC comparison. And, to be honest with you, the first thing that I noticed when I put this together is you're at the top of the rate comparison, but you're at the bottom of the SDC comparison. And those concepts are related, I think. And so Having said that, with the proposed rates for most of the utilities, for water and storm drain, holding the line, for sewer, a slight decrease, for solid waste, a slight increase. The net impact is a slight reduction from $223.06 per month to $221.43 per month. And so that's definitely, you've got, Bonnie Lake, Mount Vernon maybe starting to push up with if they have major needs in the future, but this is largely things are a little better, but sort of holding the line on things, I guess, is the key point on all this. So, we could certainly fund more in system reinvestment, but to the extent that we're doing that and doing increases to water rates or storm drain rates, that's just going to push the city's rates higher.
We have a question from Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
Uh-huh.
Chris, not to split hairs here because I think it doesn't make much of a difference. We're still at the top of the list, and that's something that long-term we do need to continue to push on rectifying. Looking at the updated rate, though, that seems to include the yard waste roll cart, which is something that not a lot of people have. Different screen it was on, but the updated amount for those without yard waste roll carts would have been in the 218 neighborhood, wasn't it?
Yeah, it would be roughly 250-ish below. So I think the yard waste rate was about $2.51. And so if you were to take 251 off of that final rate, that'd be where you would be without yard waste. And so 250, so yeah, you'd be like 218-ish, 218, 219, something like that.
I mean, I guess it does make a difference in a way, because how often is the government able to decrease the rate they charge for anything? Especially when a $31 increase had been proposed over that same period. So this is a $35 a month difference. This is something that, with these preliminary numbers, and maybe we can do better. But this is something that would save the average ratepayer over $400 a year by 2027. I mean, so that is huge. We've got that debt service that was $73 a month. They calculated that's obviously something we have to continue to work on. And you can look at these numbers, and once that debt service is dealt with, we really can start to get down where we need to be. So thank you on that so far.
Hey, Chris, if you go to your next slide, I think that's what Councilmember Hoffmeyer was kind of alluding to.
I think, we did the table with and without. So it would be
$2.10.
Yeah.
Sorry, 210. Sorry, 210.
Yeah, $210 without yard waste versus about $215 without yard waste from 2022, and then adding the yard waste on top of that gets you from 223 to 221. So part of it was I think for solid waste, those kinds of comparisons are really difficult because it's kind of a mix, like who has what service, and I figured trying to be more inclusive just for the sake of being conservative there. And then just the note at the bottom, these findings reflect an assumed general cost inflation rate of 2.5% based on previous long-term trends. If inflation continues to be through the roof for multiple years, or there are unanticipated environmental regulations that require expensive capital improvements to respond to, there may be additional rate adjustments that are needed. But at least based on the baseline assumptions, this is what the forecast looks like. And so then just to summarize the findings and recommendations, I guess that was the first part for the rate plan. We recommend that the city monitor the financial status of the utilities regularly and revisit the rate plans at least in 2025 or sooner if needed. If conditions change and the fund balances start plummeting, or something crazy happens, we might trigger an update. But other than that, I mean, we're largely showing the line being held, for the next few years. And then as far as the SDCs go, we recommend that you update them. Now, whether they go from the existing all the way to the full maximum charge, or you do something phasing towards that, or even phasing to something less than that, that's a discretionary policy on your part. Just again, with the understanding that what you don't recover from development, existing ratepayers will have to pay for. And I think that was the next steps, yeah. So the next steps here, based on input that we get from you, we can revisit any assumptions or things about the rate increases or revenue increases. The next step in our scope calls for completing the cost of service analysis. So allocating the water and sewer utility costs to customer classes, and then potentially doing some rate structure work. I think something to think about is, especially with the results being as they are, where we're not doing any significant increases in the rates, actually none for water and sewer, going down slightly. Perhaps it might be better to wait on that, just because if we stay at existing revenue levels and then start shifting between classes, some rates are going to go down, others are going to go up. And so, maybe a different way to handle that would be, as we start getting to a point where we're increasing rates, let's look at that and say, if you're, overpaying relative to your cost of service, maybe we can phase in by holding your rates and then increasing the others to sort of, get to that rough equity over time. So something that we can do, but we sort of want to pause and just say, going into this, we didn't know that the financial plans were going to look like this. So pausing, thinking, and making sure that we know what will be most beneficial for the city. So with that, just some parting thoughts there. Are there any other questions on what you've seen?
Councilmember Stuckey has a question.
And this may be more for our public works director, and something I should know. Having the bins for trash and recycling, are those required? Could a family opt to not have those at all?
I don't know, but I'm a believer in mandatory trash because I've been in other communities where people don't do it and then they dispose of it unresponsibly. So I see it on all the houses. So my assumption would be, it appears to me like it's mandatory, but if somebody else can come in here and verify that.
Yeah, I'm just new enough to not answer that for each of those different services, but yeah, generally you want to have trash be mandatory. A lot of cities do that.
Sure.
Just to give you what your others are doing, because it does lead to other issues with illegal dumping and rodents and things like that, developing in some other areas.
Yeah, and we also get residual in the county. I don't believe they have the mandatory, so we do have people who utilize our trash cans in our parks, and so it's been a problem in other communities I've been in too. So, my guess would be is mandatory. Maybe someone on the council that has some seniority here. Ryan has his hand up. I think we have an answer. So go ahead.
Yeah. The yard waste is the only optional service. I can see if I can find the specific municipal code, but that's the only one that's optional is the yard waste currently.
But the dumpster itself, or the what do we call it? The roll cart is mandatory then, right, Ryan?
Yeah, garbage and recycling. Yeah.
Yep, good. And I think that's a great policy to keep, so.
I won't push the subject further. So yeah, I mean, looking at going down a couple bucks, I know there's some that are going to say we need to do more, and you're not going to get disagreement from me. But the fact that in everything that's going on, if we adopt this, if we can save a little couple bucks, a lot of people, whenever there's increases in taxes or spending on this, people say every little bit adds up, and I agree. But it should also work in reverse. Every little bit of savings should add up. So, like Hoffmeyer, I mean, obviously there's more to it, but I'm happy to see that overall we're not looking at increase and maybe a slight decrease, even if it's only a couple bucks. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
I tend to agree with what Chris said with, the later portion of this, waiting a couple years, to look at totally redesigning rates as we get some more of this handled. I think, all in all, especially with these last 12 to 24 months, a rather unprecedented inflationary period that I don't really think any of us could have predicted. So the fact that we are looking at a possibly $4.14 a month decrease. And, you know, with no increase over 24 and 25, and, you know, those increases in 26 and 27 was just, you know, showing total stability. I think that is a great thing, and I don't think you will hear anybody on council argue that we want to do more, and we will continue to push where we can. And, you know, I would ask staff, as, you know, as we work with FCS on wrapping this up, is there any room to tighten the belts just a little more? Is there a way to get a 1%, an additional 1% reduction across the board through all utilities possibly? Just a question, but if it's not doable, maybe that's math that the public should see as well.
I think that's a really good question, and as a new person here, I struggle with that. I can tell you it's not always appreciated among staff, but my general take is to try to push costs down fairly dramatically. But with the clean water facility, I can tell you that there are still some major issues with that facility, and so it made me nervous. And so you can see those costs in there, and that's where we didn't write that one too quick, because I just don't know the answers of what it's going to cost us to get some of those things fixed. The systems are there, they're working, staff is working, your staff is, I mean, they are breaking their back sometimes, not literally, but just mentally and just exhausted getting some of these things working that just are not working correctly, which is disappointing, coming in and saying this. Now, a lot of the facilities working wonderfully, you know, so don't get me wrong. It's just a number of few systems that we'll need to focus on. And so as I get that data, I'm hoping that those actual real costs, as we get innovative, that we'll find ways to solve those problems for less money, and we can do just exactly what you're saying. So that's my goal, and to continue that dialogue.
Mr. Oborn?
So I know something we'll drive is spend what you need, not what you want. We'll drive that issue, and I think with water, we do have a vacancy right now that we've left open. We don't know that we can do it in the long term, so we'll put it in the budget. We discussed that. But by leaving that position open as long as we have, even though it was budgeted, it did help in the savings here, and it did lessen the rate increase. So certainly we'll be cognizant of it. Like we said, we have to balance it with the staff. Certainly, I went to my training class I'll talk about later, and everybody's tired about that saying about doing more with less. And so that saying there, but trying to do smartly, and I think we've got some innovative staff that can think about better ways to do it, and we'll continue to look for innovation there and look for win-wins where we can drive down costs, but yet have enough resources for them to accomplish their work.
And I think I could just add one more thing to that very briefly, is as I look at the 8 different divisions within Public Works, you're right, innovation's obviously the way we're trying to do it, right? And efficiencies and driving home, getting things done cheaper, always. Number 2 is just is lowering the level of service, and that's okay, right? Because sometimes maybe it's too costly for everybody, and we can lower the level of service. The one area that I would tell you is difficult for us to lower the level of service is water. Because people expect that 24/7, 365, and if we have an issue with stormwater and we can't get to that culvert right away, people may not notice it, right? But they will notice if they're out of water that day, and that will really impact people's lives. So we do need a level of effort where we have a little bit more cushion in the water division is what I would recommend, but that's totally council's call. But we try to provide those services, and then the regulation on the water side are actually, we don't hear as much, but they're increasing quite dramatically. And so what we have to produce to stay in compliance and what is considered clean water has grown tremendously in the last 30 years. So that's another thing we're struggling with. Yep.
Councilmember Marshall, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to thank staff and the FCS group for their time on this. It's really exciting that we can, looks like we can stabilize our rates. That was one of my personal council goals when we did our retreat, was to stabilize the rates, and, you know, based upon kind of that same article from the record that shows that we were going to have to increase. So I just will throw in my 2 cents real quick. Personally, I would hold the roll cart, you know, rather than decreasing and then looking to increase in a few years. I would just hold that steady so we don't have to do as much of an increase later down the road. I do think that it's important that we increase our SDC charges and make that a little bit more equitable. So as we're seeing on slide 3, and I appreciate Mr. Schuler pointing this out, is that our existing customers are paying 100% of the costs, and we're not getting what we should be getting from some of the developers. And I too had some concerns about increasing the cost for the developers, and I would like to see it kind of increase on an incremental basis. I'm not as much in favor of pushing it out 24 months as I am as saying in 6 months we'll do it and then we'll increase it again in another year. Because I do believe, as Mr. Evans pointed out, is the economy will drive it. So the housing prices are going to be what they're going to be. We're not going to see a huge increase, I think, in the cost of the houses because the market's just not going to allow for that. But we do need to become a little bit more equitable in making sure that the developments are paying their fair share of that. And so those would be the 2 points I have, is increase the SDCs, but I would like to see that as incremental. And Mr. Goldman had a study that he shared with me yesterday that when other communities have done these incremental step up of the SDCs, they do see kind of an increase in development. They see that it's incentivizing the development to happen a little bit sooner, as opposed to, because they know that these charges are going to be coming up. And so those are my thoughts, and I appreciate the efforts on this, and I'm really excited to see these the possibility of keeping our rates steady, even with a slight decrease. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Councilmember Munns.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. When I got on council in '08, staff, after taking an exam, there were 22 projects that they had been kicking down the road, and the mayor and council had to decide which ones they were going to tackle. And I was embarrassed that the other council was afraid to be blamed for fixing something or to having a reserve, any reserve. I don't want correction, but when you think about it, I just want to be sure we're not kicking the can down the road. I know we still have miles of water pipes or stormwater that need to be repaired. Yes, we could do without less. You're right. People don't notice the stormwater until it starts creeping in on our wastewater treatment plant. The roll cart, everybody needs to have their trash picked up. I didn't know it was mandatory. I don't have recycling. We were doing the county. For 10 years, my neighborhood had city water, or 12 years by the time I got there, and they had no trash, garbage, recycling, nothing picked up. I've seen neighbors take their yard waste and dump it on an empty property. So I don't want to see that. You offer the option, but we have access to the Navy base, and I can recycle more things out there than I can through the city. And so we just take it out to the base. So I don't need recycling, plus I don't have room to store that big blue thing. It's hard enough to restore the green thing. I mean, you know, so, but that was never, I was never told that was mandatory for my whole neighborhood. I would say most people have recycling, and all three of them, but not everybody does. And some people don't have the trash. They just keep going to the county and paying because there's one person, you know, and they're 75, 80 years old. So it's silly for them to pay that much for the roll cart, but they were able to do it when they negotiated somehow. So we have done, so I think it was about '09, just before you got on council, we had 5 years where the city lost 18% revenue because there was no building, nobody was shopping. Do you know how to adjust your budget 18% over 5 years? So when somebody left or somebody retired, they started doing cross-training, and most of it was in public works for those employees. They didn't get paid extra because now they're doing streets and they're normally, so let's be sure we have efficient, not what we can get by on for our employees. I'm sorry, I don't want to work them to death. That's not right. So yes, we can get by with less at times, but let's make sure if that position really can be sloughed off. Maybe it's only 6 months and we should be hiring that water expert again for, I mean, come on. I've seen more people who gripe about their bill and they'll go into Starbucks or Would-Be Coffee and spend $20 in a day. So it's how you plan your money. I've eaten rice and beans for the first 5 years we were married because we couldn't afford much. So you have to learn to adjust, but I don't want the city to get back to where they were when the economy suddenly just dropped. And we lost 18% of our revenue. So that means whoever left or because of retirement or military move with their spouse or whatever, we couldn't afford to replace them. And right now, I think we're still very much deficient in the parks. We have a lot of beautiful parks. We've gotten a lot of awards. But I just want to be sure we have adequate. We don't have to have over, but let's not get down below. I love it that we can keep things at a level, but let's don't deplete so much that all of a sudden we're yelling, the skull, whatever, that we've got to raise things too much. Let's be reasonable about this. It's nice to say, yeah, we lowered it, and I would love to do it. I hate writing those checks every month. It's our money. We earned it hard, and now I've got to pay this and this and this and this and this. Like, what's left? But let's be reasonable and let's not work our employees to death. Because, well, I think we can get by if we just have 1 or 2 left in this department. You've got to take care of your own. And we're responsible. Well, we don't hire staff, but we're responsible for the budget. Just be wise about this. It's nice to be able to gloat and say, hey, we lowered it. But right now, that 3% lowering looks good. But let's please be reasonable and think it all out. And I really would like to know what capital projects, yes, we're doing them, but what are the ones that have been left behind that we should be doing? We're responsible that they can flush their toilet, they have clean water, and the electricity comes, and people usually want cable too, but that's another thing. That's a private company, that's not us. And we've seen how necessary it is to have Wi-Fi. The kids that don't have it, they get behind in school, and going to sit without a bathroom in front of a school bus to hook up your Wi-Fi because where you live, you don't have it. It is so important, and a lot of people are working from home, and that's a good thing. I know in Virginia, if you had an office in your home, you had to pay for your fax machine, you had to pay for this, you had to pay for that, because you had a business in your home. It's part of your business license. We haven't gone to that, which is nice. But Wi-Fi has become so important to so many people all the time now, and we're not getting very fast on that. So it's just, please be reasonable. That's all I ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to see these rates stabilizing as well. And as a city council, the decisions that we make affect everybody's lives. And we have to remember that. And, these SDCs, they are needed. However, they are going to affect people's lives. The developer's going to pay for it, but in the end, somebody that lives in that house is going to pay for it. So my intention is to go out and talk to as many of these builders that we currently have working in this city between now and when we make a decision on this, so I know what the actual impact is. And I would encourage my fellow council members to do the same. And if you're looking for where those are, the city administrator provided us a beautiful list in his report showing us exactly the projects that are going on. For example, there's a 48 residential unit project going on right on Barrington and Eli. That's $480,000 impact to their project. Somebody's going to pay for that. So before we make these decisions that will affect people's lives, I ask all of you, go out and do your due diligence, talk to people, see what the real impact is going to be so we can make a good and educated decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Councilmember Stuckey.
To our Public Works Director and perhaps our City Administrator, looking at these recommendations based on the study, what are your thoughts on it? I mean, do you agree? I mean, let's just say we said, okay, exactly what that says, let's go ahead and do it. Is that something that we think is feasible? What's your thoughts on it?
We've had a lot of opportunity to vet this. You're vetting it for the first time. So we're bringing something that we discussed with ourselves among the group here, and we're very comfortable with this as a team. It's a team effort led by our finance director, and our new public works director has played an active role. So we've all worked on these numbers. We all made sure that they were accurate, made sure that it was the most current numbers. So there's been a lot of input here on that. So I'll let them, David and Steve certainly could speak for themselves instead of me speaking for them, but I know I'm comfortable with these numbers and going forward and with the recommendation. I mean, the key issue is we know there's, with the significant increase of the STC, we know that's a tough one, and so we didn't build it into the rates. Made a policy decision not to build it in there, not knowing exactly what the council would do. And then there's a little bit of nervousness that certainly can go to debt service, but building can go up and down. We know it's a cyclical cycle, unfortunately. And so some cities have built too much on impact fees, and it's been detrimental for them for that. So we've tried to be conservative here and take a middle ground. So I'm very comfortable, but Steve Schuler, our Public Works Director, is at the mic here. And
I really appreciate this opportunity to take 1 minute. And so in case someone 5 years from now plays this back and said, we promised that we could do 0% in the year 2027, I have an opportunity to put the footnote, which you saw on the slide, but I'll further emphasize it. One, like Council said, we are at unprecedented times. I'm understanding now on a better level what Federal Reserve balance sheet is, right? And all of us have tried to understand what $9 trillion in printed money is, right? And what that means to the economy. So we have that footnote. This is based on 2.5% historic. And like you always hear on the radio or something, historic trends do not always mean that that's what's going to happen in the future. So one, we know inflation is going to continue to impact us. It appears in the near term. We don't know what that's going to, none of us know how that's going to impact us in the year 2027. So I have that caution. The second caution is environmental regulations. In my 30-year career, it has only increased and it has not decreased for the most part. So what does that mean going forward? How much new environmental regulation that we're not even aware of are we going to have to address in water, in stormwater, in wastewater, et cetera, that we don't know about? And that's the other footnote. So again, I would just caution that I could see a scenario where we have to make increases in the year 2026 because there's a new metal rule, a metal I've never even heard of, that we need to take out in the parts per trillion. And I get to learn a lot of cool things about this metal and how it affects us, our environment, our children, and everything like that. So we're still humans. We're still trying to figure that out. So environmental concerns, environmental regulation concerns. As far as having everyone pay their fair share, I would tell you that I think that's important, right? That's a policy decision, but everyone should pay their fair share. Now, I think I agree with everything that I heard Council said. I think whether that's a year from now or whether that's 2 years from now that we get caught up is completely a decision by the Council. And you're right, it's going to have a huge impact on people that are right now in the middle of projects. And like you mentioned, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you did the math perfectly right. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to, what'd you say, 48 lot subdivision. So you need to consider that carefully. What I don't want to be, where I would say is, I don't want to be 2 years from now saying we haven't updated and done our fair share since 1996, and now it's 2024. I would love this Council to say, we've addressed it, we know we are moving the right direction, and that ship is headed in the right direction. So that would be my feedback.
So,
And I also have some feedback.
go ahead, sorry.
So in a former life, I worked in the city that grew from 47,000 folks to about 144,000 folks. And, you know, I also worked in the development services department during the first part of my career. And during that time, I've reviewed site plans and development applications for thousands of homes. And and millions of square feet of non-residential space. You know, I've worked with developers like Pulte Homes, Lennar, Rockefeller Group, you know, and I've never met any developer who actually wanted to pay more in connection charges and impact fees. But I think what's important to keep in mind for a policymaking body such as yourselves is the true purpose of what impact fees and these connection charges are for. I mean, they actually help provide the valuable facilities and the infrastructure that's needed to accommodate growth. And if funding is not available to do that, then it actually can have the opposite effect. If there aren't sufficient impact fees or there aren't sufficient connection charges, growth might not be able to be accommodated, and that might have the unfortunate effect of slowing growth. So yes, these impact fees that we work with the FCS group developed are a large increase from where we are now. Keep in mind that we haven't really changed our connection charges for quite a while. But I think what might be best to consider is perhaps a balance, is perhaps some kind of plan or some kind of phasing in of these fees so that it's not like an instant shock to the system, but something that is more palatable to the development community that's out there, so that they understand that we do have a need to increase these fees, but we're willing to roll them up over a period of time in order to get to where we need to go.
So I guess and I appreciate all that feedback. Obviously, you guys stare at these numbers all the time. I just want to make sure I'm clear with my question. The numbers that were given, where they show to the average ratepayer, a small decrease, as opposed to just a stabilization. Is that something that staff is comfortable with?
Yes.
Yes. And
Okay.
I can go into more detail, but absolutely yes.
So I get
We are not going to have that issue of the hockey stick where we're going to forcibly force it down, and then you should expect a big, huge increase. With the footnote that I already went over, that if inflation is at 17% in the year 2024, it doesn't match up with the 2.5% inflation that we have here. So there are those risks. And if there's a new environmental regulation or something like that, then yeah, that's really not part of this. But yes, with the world we know today and the things, we are very confident with this. And we weren't trying to push things down artificially, I think is what you're asking. No, we were not. We knew that council, when I interviewed with almost all the council members, and utility rates came up with just about everybody. And so I knew as a new person that this is a big deal, this is an issue. But in no way did we try to artificially create a rate reduction, only because that's council wanted, but we don't believe that that's really, that we can back that up. So I would tell you as staff that we can back up this rate reduction.
So let me then circle back and ask Councilmember Munns, because I understand your feeling of caution, but if we have staff with the recommendation and we have a survey that we paid a sizable amount, give us a recommendation, why would we not use that recommendation and reduce rates? Unless that's not what you're implying and I misunderstood your intent.
That wasn't what I was
Okay,
implying.
at least, yeah.
No, I said I was comfortable with this 3% reduction.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
just wanted to be
misunderstood.
sure we're not, I want to recheck, be sure we're not limiting, so we end up in a
Gotcha.
fiasco again.
I thought you meant just stabilize and not accept the decrease. So I apologize.
3%
That's
is
why.
good.
Okay.
No.
Okay. We're on the same
and
page.
I really appreciate Councilmember Munn's historic time on the council and her caution, her appropriate caution, which I think I just repeated to you with the caution that I provided. Yes.
Any other comments, questions, concerns from council? Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
Just to staff and to the FCS group. Looks like a home run, but it is also the first inning probably. There's a lot of game left, so let's keep it up, and we'll continue to haggle over the SDC and what that looks like. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on.
Well,
Sorry, go
real
ahead.
quick, before we move on,
No,
just so
no.
we have proper direction, I think, from what I'm hearing, that we're ready to bring an ordinance to the city council for the rates. But perhaps we can have another workshop or more discussion on the STCs. Does that sound about right?
I'm seeing head nods
Okay.
and thumbs ups.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Okay, moving on to development services. This is our action item, the Larsen annexation. Who's going to be presenting on this one? Is it David Cool?
Good
there you are.
afternoon.
I'm looking at the screen instead of in front of my face. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Heisen and members of council. This afternoon, we have an annexation request by the Larsen family, who is here today. I think it's about a little less than a half-acre parcel you have there at 957 Capitol Street. This is a map of the area that is an air photo that you can see the houses down below is the area in the county, and the area that surrounds that in yellow is the incorporated area of the city. You can see the roads are labeled there. Capitol Street runs from the south up through the project all the way over to Highway 20. And as a marker, you can see Southwest 24th Street over there to give you an idea how far at the end of town that is. Obviously, the blue outlined area is the parcel in question owned by the Larsen family. And looking back to the east on that particular side, you can see Friend Street is right next to the property. And then a little bit further over is Southwest Scenic Heights. So that puts it in frame for you. This is just one parcel that we would like to annex. This particular parcel, again, would be just one only ownership, so it would be 100% of the potential annexation would be proposed by this particular applicant. The land use is residential, and the city zoning classification is R1. This annexations, you've seen this type of graphic before. We try and keep them consistent for you, so you can see that we follow the same program every time. The decision to annex, of course, is at your discretion. To go for a yes response would be to accept the area as proposed or geographically modify the area, which would mean you could suggest that the applicant go out and find additional signatures to broaden the annexation. It's also a question you ask is whether to require adoption of the city zoning with the annexation and to share the city's indebtedness, which is our bonds and whatnot. If you were to say no, both parties would have no right to appeal and it would just end. Adopting the annexation in general, it increases the service demands for our fire and police departments, as well as it increases impacts on our transportation system. In a property-specific nature, the infrastructure connections would need to be thought through. And in this case, if you decide to go forward today, we'll route this particular request out to the Public Works Department and other departments so they can comment on any connections that might be needed in the future, as well as any future trash service or anything else that might pertain to this site. Adopting the zoning is what we're recommending as well. You go back to the 2016 update of the comp plan, and so it's a generalized land use which is residential. In a property-specific nature, it is residential, and R1 is the zoning we would recommend. The indebtedness, what that refers to is referring to existing and future bonds. So the applicant would agree to pay future bonds as well as existing bonds, and those are all shared by all city taxpayers. So the action this afternoon would be to conduct the meeting with the applicant and accept the annexation request as is or modify the area. And so again, the applicant is here this afternoon, which is good to see. And we are available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Cool. Before I turn to council, I will ask Mr. Larsen if you have anything you want to contribute. We have a letter in the packet, but do you have anything you'd like to contribute beyond that?
Go ahead and get in the mic there, please.
Thank you.
Just to expand on the letter that's already in your packet, I've moved into this neighborhood and found out very quickly from my neighbors that most of them are not interested in annexation. We do, however, have a very old water system that has required repairs, and I don't know the estimable life left on that, as well as our current septic systems and those in the neighborhood. I believe this is the way the whole neighborhood is eventually going to go, but keeping the requests of my neighbors in mind, I'm only requesting the annexation of our property. I would certainly be happy to share in the indebtedness. I'd be looking at immediate services that we could render, like trash and recycling, with the eventuality of when those water and sewer systems fail to be hooked up there. It is contiguous to properties that are directly to the east of us, abut our property, and so it seems to make sense, and in consideration of recent annexation requests that have been approved, that is what had me bring this forth to you at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it certainly seems to tick all of the boxes. So I will turn to council and see if there are any questions, concerns. Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
I think that's a great point, that the garbage trucks drive right past your house. This, to me, this looks very much like the previous two annexation requests that we have filled in, and I guess that would be my question to staff: is does this feel the same as the previous two requests?
Yes, Councilman Hoffmeyer, this is the same basic request, one particular lot, and we support the project.
Thank you, David.
Other questions, comments from council? No? On a personal and selfish note, I would very much welcome the idea of you being back in city limits, for reasons that will remain unstated, but if we could make that happen, that would be, I think that would have a lot of potential. So we've got, Councilmember Munns, thank you.
It says it's an action items. I'll make a motion if someone else isn't, have more questions. I move we continue with the annexation process for the Larsen property.
Second.
Excellent. Been moved by Councilmember Munns to continue with the annexation request, counsel by Stuckey. Any questions or comments, concerns before we move to a vote? All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Oh, you have a question? Go ahead.
Is that the verbiage that staff needs?
Yeah, I think that's sufficient. We're just moving forward with the existing single annexation is what the motion is read at. You could expand it, but that'll keep it going, and then we'll do more serious talk and work through all the logistics. But this is the opportunity for you to say, no, we don't want to move ahead, or move ahead, and I think the motion does a great job of giving us direction to move ahead.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. All right. Again, the motion by Munns is to move forward with the annexation request. Second by Stuckey. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. Welcome back. Okay. Let's see, next up, still in development services, we've got zoning code revisions, fire sprinklers and existing building code, and again, we will turn to Mr. Cool.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Heisen. Today we have some professionals here with us. We have the Fire Chief, Ray Merrill. We have the Deputy Fire Chief, Mike Buxton. And we have our building official, Ginger Pennington. And so we'd like to start off with the sprinkler system discussion and then go next to the building code discussion. So I would like to turn it over to Chief Merrill.
Thank you, Mr. Cool. Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, Ray Merrill, your favorite fire chief. We're going to talk a little bit about 13D fire sprinkler systems. And as we go through this, when we talked about this previously, I said I was going to bring a little primer about fire sprinkler systems so you have a little bit better idea what we're talking about when we talk about 13, 13R, 13Ds. Now, I could spend a couple hours, if you like, going into the whole systems if you I guess not, Beth. I'm trying, but we'll see. You're up for it? Thank you. Because as most of you know, I can talk for a really long time. When we take a look at the license certification, this is done by the state of Washington, and there are specific licenses in order to install different fire sprinkler systems. If you're licensed for you can only do the underground. If you're licensed for a level 1, you can only install 13Ds, and that can be done by a plumbing company as long as they're licensed for it. They don't have to be what's called NICET licensed. So you could be licensed by the state as a plumber. Level 2, you can install 13R and 13D. Level 3, you can install 13, 13R, and 13D. And an I and a T is strictly to do inspections and testing of the systems. So to get an idea, when we talk about the different systems, 13 is primarily installed in large commercial occupancies. City code says at 10,000 square feet, or if it's an A2 occupancy with more than 100 people in it. So we're talking large buildings. Looks something like this. This is a relatively simple 13 system, a wet system, a dry system like we have in this building. It's a wet and a dry. It can get a little more complicated when it looks something like that, again for a 13 system. Considerably more expensive to put a 13 system in because of all the requirements, the back checks, the flow controls, all the valving and everything else that's included. When we take a look at a 13R, this is for residential up to 4 stories in height, and it's for apartments and condominiums. This comes out of the fire code and out of our municipal code. So up to 4 stories in height, you can put a 13R. What makes it nice about 13R? It can all be done in plastic. CPVC plastic piping. It's glued together. It's strictly plastic pipe. You can see it's a very simple riser. When you look at that riser in comparison to that riser, a considerable amount of distance between the two. Again, it's got a back check valve system in it because it's a dedicated water line off of our water system. We want to protect our water from not being contaminated, so we've got check valves in the system. But again, very simple. No clapper valves. A sprinkler head opens, water flows out of the end of the sprinkler head. Again, plastic pipe throughout, very simply to install. Glued together system. Yes, Mr. Hoffmeyer.
On that last picture, I seen the flow sensor. I'm assuming that would send an alarm to the fire department.
That is correct.
The reason I ask that, as we move along, if that's not the case on some of the later models, let me know.
Yes.
Thanks.
So 13Rs are a monitored system. They're required by our ordinance to be monitored. So you do see there's a fire alarm panel there as well. So that's 2 of the requirements for 13 and 13R systems. And again, plastic pipe, easily to install. Going to be in 13D to be required in townhomes and duplex units. And when we look at this, by the State Building Code Council, they're authorized to be installed in townhomes and duplexes. The city has not adopted that requirement within the city limits, although it is under the residential code. When we take a look at it, there's a lot of duplexes. There's a lot of townhomes going in. Now, when we consider a townhome, when we look at the design of the structures, you could look at an apartment complex and you could look at a townhome and you can't tell the difference from the front. But a townhome has got some very specific requirements, which says from the grade level all the way to the underside of the sheathing of the roof, it has to be one continuous unit. They can't stack a unit on top of a unit. So that's going to be our difference in a townhome. You could have one that's 5,000 square feet in size, 6,000 square feet in size, and they're considered a single-family dwelling because of the townhome design, with the separation between the walls. And Ms. Pennington, I trust, is going to speak to that. You're not going to speak to that? Oh, I thought you were. Okay. So there are requirements in the townhome where you can't penetrate between building to or occupancy to occupancy, whereas in an apartment complex and a condominium you can. You can have pipes running between the buildings. You can have electrical systems running between. Townhome, it's an individual unit. But I'm going to show you a video here, and I hope it loads. I'm looking this way just to make sure when we talk a little bit about fire. But a 13D system is a really easy system to install. A plumber can install it. It's called a flow-through system. There are no flow switches on this. So you flush your toilet and water is going to flow through the sprinkling system, which is different than a 13 and a 13R system. The 13D is a flow-through system all the time. You can see it's put in with what's called PEX pipe, which means you just plug the pipes together with the sprinkler heads, put the sprinkler head onto the rafter or the joist, and you've got your sprinkler head installed. And this gives you an idea what it looks like inside of the structure. It's plastic pipe that's just running throughout the building. Again, they're flanged together. And we only have to sprinkle living spaces with a 13D system. So garages, bathrooms under 55 square feet, closets, attic spaces are not required to be sprinkled. Strictly the living spaces, which is different than a 13 and a 13R system. So I should be able to load this one. Can you start it for me? I don't care about the sound on this one. We don't want the sound. So this is a townhome that caught on fire. And this is a 4-unit townhome, unit to unit to unit. You can see the fire coming out of the front door. You can see the black smoke. This was caused by a cigarette that was thrown down in an ashtray that was on top of a great big stack of papers. And actually, the townhome construction in this building did its job because it did not extend to either unit on either side. We were very fortunate in this fire. Let's see, there should be one more where the flames come out the front door. But that's okay, we'll move on. These are the apartments off of Heller, correct? Yep. There you go. Now you can see the fire out the back of the building. That's what I was looking for. That bright glow was when the back of the building, the windows blew out and the sliding glass door blew out. All right. And to give you an idea, this was what it looked like at the end. Theoretically, this could have displaced all families, all 4 families that lived in this unit. But this building was built in such a way that it was constructed correctly. It had the right separations between building to building. In some of the construction today, you will not necessarily see this, but you can see the amount of damage that occurred. The entire structure inside was damaged. Both floors was damaged. Had a sprinkler system been in here, you would have seen a very small amount of damage, and probably about $2,000 to $3,000 is the average loss if we have a fire in a sprinkled building. And that's what the townhomes look like. Where'd my picture go? We got that picture there. Got it there. But we've lost it. Oh, there we go. So this is a duplex that we had that caught on fire here not too long ago. And there's no separation between the building on the right, the unit on the right and the unit on the left. So we actually had fire that went from the ground level up and all the way across the attic space in this structure. Had there been a sprinkling system, it would have put that fire out before it got into the attic space. It would have been up on the second floor, put that fire out. In essence, this fire displaced both families, where if that building would have been sprinkled, the family to the left would still be able to live in that structure. The average time for somebody to be out of their house today is 14 months from the day of the fire. You remember the Atalanta Way fire that we had about a year ago, where there was 7 units that were damaged? The folks there still are not back into their homes. So some benefits. We talk about the cost all the time, but very rarely do we talk about the benefits. Is there a benefit to spending money? So let's take a look at what 13D can get you. There we go. So we look at what we consider flashover. Flashover is the amount of time it takes for a room to become fully involved in fire. In today's environment, flashover can occur in 5 minutes. That means it goes from nothing to fully involved in 5 minutes. The old days, boy, that's a bad term, the old days. Back in the day, let's use back in the day, we looked at 30 minutes before flashover just because of construction methods. Today, it's 5 minutes from the time that fire started, and we've got a video to show you here in just a short bit about that. We look at children and the elderly. That 5 minutes is going to go by really fast in order to get somebody outside of a structure, especially if it happens at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. We take a look at the injuries. We get the fire put out in that first 2 or 3 minutes, and it reduces the need for firefighters to place us at risk, as well as the injuries to the homeowners or to bystanders. We also look at water savings. We only have 26 gallons of water a minute that comes out of that sprinkler head, puts the fire out in 2 minutes, whereas we come in and we use hose lines that put out 150 gallons of water a minute, and we're there for 10 or 15 minutes trying to put the fire out. 26 gallons of water a minute over 144 square feet will put out a relatively good-sized fire. 26 gallons of water a minute. We know it takes less materials, that we're going to put that fire out sooner. Standards have shown that greenhouse gases are reduced by 97% from the amount of energy that's put out from that fire. We reduce the water runoff. We reduce contamination. We reduce the amount of junk going down into the storm drains because we contain that fire to a small area instead of the entire structure. And it also looks at long-term pollution reduction. There's less materials that have burned, and there's less materials that need to be replaced. So some trade-ups. Where can we save money by putting in a sprinkling system? And Chief Buxton did a lot of work on a lot of follow-up on this. We can have narrower roads. We can have fewer hydrants. We can have smaller water mains, smaller setbacks. The cost of the damage that NFPA has shown with a unit with a sprinkler is about $2,000 versus $45,000 or higher average loss to the structure. Home insurance, you can see savings of 5 to 15% on your fire insurance premiums. And we look at it's 1 to 2% of the home's total cost as far as a minimal investment. So where are some impacts that we can trade up to? Our roads can be narrower, which saves the cost of all that asphalt going down on the ground. We can go to longer dead-end streets, which means you can get more units into the property that the developer is trying to develop because you've got a longer dead end. Instead of our 150 feet, we can go longer on a dead end. We can look at some building setbacks and steeper grades. If you have a grade to get up a hill, the code says at 10%, the developer has to do something in order to mitigate that grade change. By putting sprinkling systems in, that's one mitigation effort. That's less grade work that they have to do on the site itself. Increased hydrant spacing, instead of 400 feet, we could go up to 600 feet, which saves the developer, again, more money. And we take a look at access points. At 100 units or more, we have to have 2 access points. If it's fully sprinkled by the code, we're allowed to only have 1 access point. Again, reducing the cost of all the asphalt and the dirt work that goes in to building that subdivision. Yes.
A house fire can become deadly in 2 minutes. The fire burns hot and fast. It creates toxic smoke that spreads throughout the house. You are about to experience 2 fires in 2 rooms that were set up with identical furnishings. The rooms are the same size, same windows and doors. The fires in both rooms were ignited within combustible materials commonly found in typical living rooms. One room is protected with a home fire sprinkler. The other is not. This is the room that does not have a fire sprinkler. After the fire starts, it quickly moves up the curtain and spreads to the furniture. The smoke alarm activates at 24 seconds. Look above you and behind you. The smoke is thick and dark. There is nothing to stop the fire, so it builds strength, generating heat and producing poisonous smoke until flashover, the point at which everything in the room ignites. Watch for that when the timer reads 2 minutes. No one can survive flashover.
Right now, we're looking at room temperatures in excess of 1,000 degrees. That's the windows breaking out. And the smoke is less than a foot off of the floor. Go ahead and try to get out. And that room is fully flashed over, excess of 1,000 degrees.
Look around. Everything is destroyed by the extreme heat and smoke. Remember the flashover? There would be only seconds for the family to escape a fire before flashover. The destruction in this room makes it clear the home is uninhabitable and a complete loss. This room is protected with one fire sprinkler in the ceiling. As the curtain catches fire, note how fast the flames spread. Watch the timer. At 26 seconds, smoke activates the smoke alarm. Find the sprinkler in the ceiling. At 37 seconds, high heat from the fire activates the sprinkler, controlling the fire and preventing it from becoming deadly. Only the heat from fire activates the sprinkler, not smoke. In a typical house fire, only one sprinkler will activate. Take a close look at the room after the sprinkler activated. There is very little damage. The room is wet, but intact. Look around the room. If a family were sleeping, the sprinkler would have given them time to safely escape. The fire is confined to the room of origin, and the family would likely be able to stay in the home or move back into the home in a few days.
There are sprinkler heads today that'll activate once the temperature of the room drops below 153 degrees. They automatically shut off. The water flow stops. Okay. And that just gives you an idea of what the pictures look like between the two different structures from the fires. So depending on the licensed plumber, we could look at $3.50 to $4.50 per square foot to install the sprinkling system. Something I could really never nail down completely is that the square footage of the entire structure or just the area that they are putting the sprinkling system in. And I've never gotten a straight answer from any of the installers. They always say it's $3.50 to $4.50 per square foot. But there's some variables in this. Again, they're only required in the living spaces. They're not required in the garages, attics, bathrooms, less than 55 square feet, closets or concealed spaces, or on the porch. Strictly in the living area. That was rather brief, but you can see there are some trade-ups. Even though we look at the cost of that sprinkling system, even at $4 a square foot, when you look at what can be traded up on the outside of the structure, would definitely offset the cost of the sprinkling system to the structure itself. If a developer can save money on the location of hydrants, the amount of road that they have to put in, the width of the road, the amount of earthwork and asphalt that has to be installed, the entrances and exits, the developable property, they may be able to get 1 or 2 or 3 more homes on that property, would certainly offset the cost of the sprinkling system itself. I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. And this was very brief. I mean, I could really spend a long time about this.
It was fascinating. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. I do have a question on the road width, how the sprinkler system affects the ability to have narrower roads. I would assume we still have to respond to whether there's a fire or there's a sprinkler, you still have to respond, so the trucks will still have to go in. And how does that impact then, like the trash, the garbage trucks and that kind of stuff?
Okay, so the code requires 26 lineal feet of road width. We can go down to 20 feet. We can reduce that even narrower inside of the structure in the drive aisles itself. Because the distance of the hydrants is extended, we can reduce that 26 feet down to 20 feet.
Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
I think it's important to remember that we're only talking new construction, and it wouldn't apply to single-family standalone units either. So given that, you know, I think it would be an acceptable cost for the pros, for the trade-offs. You know, the one thing that I would want to be assured by staff, you know, if a resolution was to come forward on this at some point, currently, say you have a single enlisted person that deploys for 6 months, or say you have an elderly couple that snowbirds in Arizona for 3 or 4 months. Currently, they can have their water, sewer, garbage turned off. With the 13D, you wouldn't be able to turn it off. But it seems like a fairly easy fix to me. It seems like that there could be some type of, hey, I'm leaving for 6 months, please put my account into a standby status. There will be a 0 meter read until I get back. So that's the one assurance I would want from staff, is that it was only an expense for new construction, that it wasn't something that's going to hit an individual every single year. So that's where I would be on that.
And that would not be my department, that would be somebody else's department. I'm going to pass the buck.
Councilmember Stuckey.
Yeah, Chief, a couple questions, and I really appreciate you showing the potential savings for something like this too. That's always appreciated. So a couple questions. Do other cities around us currently adopt this model?
I'm going to change to Chief Buxton. DuPont down south of Tacoma does. Anacortes is not yet.
No, Anacortes does in certain areas, depending on the square footage of homes. So they not only do townhomes, they also do single-family residences, depending on the size. I think it's 5,000 square feet. And down in King County, there's a lot more plumbers are also licensed, but our local plumbers, if they don't have the demand, they're not going to go get the license, because there is a special bond for that also they have to get. And the main reason we're doing this is I see the new developments and plans coming in. There are more and more townhomes going in than ever before. And a 13R system costs a lot more money than a 13D system. So if they can build townhomes instead of apartment buildings, they've been able to get around this. And for me, it's a life safety issue. It's not a dollars and cents and a trade-off issue. Over the last 30 years, I think I did trying to count it up on my head, I've been to like 13 fire deaths, and I'm just trying to avoid that, and you know, especially the elderly people. The example that Ray showed you, we've had 3 in that townhome complex since I've worked for the city, and we had 1 fatality. The second fire we had was a fatality, or was that the first one? And this last one was an elderly lady that messed up. Although it didn't extend into the other units, it caused a lot of damage. So there was damage, and there was an insurance claim for those people. Back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have sprinkled apartment buildings, and we see a lot of damage in those. The Atlanta Way fire was built back then. There were actually 8 units. When you get a mixture of 8 different people, sometimes somebody's going to screw up, and that affects the other people in the complex. So the way I look at this, they're built like apartment buildings, but they're not classified as apartment buildings. But I think that we need to regulate them somehow with some protection so we can protect the other people on each side of the unit. I think that's about
That's
it.
it, yep.
Okay.
So we recently responded with Navy to a fire. It did a lot of damage to the structure. Unfortunately, it put 8 families out of their units because the wiring for all of the units ran from underground through the first unit that caught on fire, damaged that wire, so everything downstream of that wiring put those folks out of their homes. Had that been a sprinkled building, that would not have occurred. So we look at the damage to the structure as well as the potential damage and inconvenience to the people that also live in those buildings. Just like the fire we had over on Lanyard Loop, that they were displaced because of the damage to the attic. Had it been a sprinkled building, that would not have occurred. Those people would still be in their unit.
And are these systems that need to be inspected and maintained on a regular basis as well?
No. Once they're installed, we do the plan review, we do the initial inspection on the system, and after that, we don't have to go back. Nobody else has to inspect the system. The sprinkler heads have been certified for forever. There's just nothing to fail in the system.
Is there a way, because of course it always affects development and affordable housing, I understand, what price do you put on a person's life, but you could take things to any extreme, and you could take that as far as you could go. Is there any way to make this highly encouraged and somehow incentivized with reduced fees or something like that, as opposed to making it required? I mean, obviously with that, most would probably still opt not to do it. I understand that, but is there any way to do it from that approach?
Well, we have utilized sprinkling systems in order to help the developer meet what he is trying to accomplish. Because of grade levels, we've had them sprinkle where we would not have had access, but by allowing them to sprinkle the building, increase the travel distance, allowed them to put more buildings on their lots. So it's advantageous to the developer. He got 2 more buildings in. Because of grade levels in other locations, allowed them to develop larger lot areas, put more homes in. We had a developer here quite a few years ago that, because of the design of where the units were going to go, they were able to put in 5 more units because we allowed them to sprinkle the building. So we didn't force it, but they made money off of it. So there was a trade-up by doing sprinklings in single-family, multifamily, or duplexes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Evans.
Chief, Deputy Chief, thank you. Chief, I'm assuming this isn't why you brought the candy, looking at the agenda, but
Well,
thank
actually, usually I only bring candy if I really want something very specific. This one's kind of broad this time, just...
So you're doing refills?
If you'd like refills,
Okay.
I got them. Yes, sir.
My thoughts on the sprinkler system for a townhome is it's almost a community responsibility. I mean, you're at the jeopardy of your neighbors. You have no idea how they're living their lives. I know how we live our lives in my home, so I feel pretty safe. But if I had somebody living immediately next door to me impacting the lives of my family, it's a pretty small ask in those scenarios. Single family, that's a different scenario. But with townhomes and duplexes, I think it's almost a responsibility that, I mean, it's in the building code.
It is.
We've opted not to join that team yet.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I will say, the fire that we had, the one video I showed, the tenants were very fortunate because those townhomes were built correctly. They had their 1-hour separation between unit to unit. They had from grade level all the way to the underside of the sheathing. They were very well encapsulated. Today, we're not that fortunate. Just put it on the table. Had that happened today, if that structure would have been built recently, we probably would have lost 2 or 3 units in that unit instead of just the one.
Thanks. I appreciated the The slides on the cost reduction, I think that there's a lot of things in the code that on the surface don't appear to be fire safety related when it comes to things like grade or dead ends or setbacks. Some of those rules seem arbitrary, but they're in the code for a reason, and that reason is fire safety. And so I really appreciated the examples that you gave on potential cost savings, because, as Fire Marshal Buxton said, for him it's a life safety issue, not a dollars and cents issue, but for any developer, it's always going to be a dollars and a cents issue. But if we can say, yeah, but we can offset it with this, this, and this, which will end up costing you the same or even less, then there's really no excuse not to do it.
Right.
I live in a condo now that's sprinkled, and it's the first time I've ever lived anywhere that's sprinkled, and the peace of mind that I have, because, I don't know what my neighbors are up to. I have no idea if the people right next to me, smoke inside or anything. I don't know, and the peace of mind is just huge. I'm not sure I'll ever live anywhere that isn't sprinkled after this place. So I certainly encourage us encouraging things like, 13R sprinkling systems, as long as we can make it affordable, because, if it's not affordable, then no one's going to be building it or living in it.
Exactly.
So I appreciate the homework that you've done on offsetting the cost and making this feasible. It's important.
I can't take all the credit. Chief Buxton has done a lot. Building department has done a lot. So it's been a group effort to get this all put together. So it's all of us working together.
For sure.
It's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Comments, questions? Nope, doesn't look like it.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to our next, which is our financial primer by David Goldman. Yes?
I believe there was two parts to this. Was there a second component?
There's more fire discussion later on in the agenda.
But was there discussion on the existing building code? No.
I'm sorry, are we not done with this item?
I'll just jump in here.
Sure.
The existing building code, as you remember, we talked about it at a meeting several months ago. And what we were doing with the existing building code is matching up one provision to the non-conforming regulations. And I've drafted the language in your council agenda bill, which is the exact same language that we would like to do. What it does is just substitutes one for the other. Instead of requiring a number of 60%, it would drop down to 50%, and it would exempt the foundation walls. So essentially, it's the same definition at this point, now that we've proposed revising it. And our building official can explain any details on that if you need some.
Ginger, you're in the hot seat.
What's that?
You're in the hot seat.
The last thing. Yeah, so what we're looking at is making it so that they both match up, because what's confusing to people is when you have one thing that says something in this book and something over here that says something here. So if we can match them up and make them comply, that's the best thing. By not adding the foundation, not counting the foundation, it's almost putting it back at 60% if you really look at it that way, because we don't count the cost of the foundation in the valuation. So that's the exception. Do you have any questions in regards to it?
Questions on the existing building code? Don't appear to have any questions.
Thank you.
Good catch, Mr. Oborn, thank you. So before we move on to our next item, I'm going to call for a brief recess, 5 minutes, and then we will be back in session. Go ahead.
Can we provide a option for council, since we're about an hour behind schedule? Do you want to postpone the primer, David Goldman, on? Are you open to that suggestion? We didn't communicate with you.
I was actually going to suggest that, so.
So you can make that now after your 5 minute, but staff's going to bring forward the option of postponing the primer.
Sure, yeah, I don't mind postponing the primer. Do you need a motion to pull it from the agenda? Although the agenda wasn't approved at the beginning of the meeting, so.
Yeah, we're in the workshop, so it's just
Right.
kind of whatever the
Okay.
consensus is of the group. It's fine.
Thumbs up, head nods? Yep,
Okay.
I was looking forward to it.
All right, so then we'll come back and do items, the fire department.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Goldman, and we will do the primer some other time. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
get one to you.
Okay, welcome back from break. We will now resume our workshop. Council has decided to postpone the financial primer to a future meeting. Our apologies to our Finance Director, David Goldman. And we're going to move on to Fire Department for fire vehicle replacements. We've got our Fire Chief, Ray Merrill, and Central Services Supervisor, Sandra Place, to present.
So Sandra will be presenting.
Okay. Are you there, Sandra?
Yep, I am here. I'm sorry. I'm having some camera issues here.
No worries.
So I'm just going to talk. Okay. Timmy, were you going to share the presentation or would you like me to?
He says either way.
Okay, Timmy, if you'd please share it for me.
And he's on it.
Thanks. Good evening, Mayor Pro Temp and City Council members. Sandra Place, Central Services Supervisor, and I get the honor of presenting the 2022 fire vehicle replacements to you this evening. In our 2021-2022 biennial budget, we include funds for 2 Chevrolet Tahoe SUVs that are currently used by the fire department. These funds have been set aside in the replacement over years, and specifically for our smaller vehicles and equipment, as you know, our engines, we were not able to fund those over these last few years. Next slide, please. Both of these Tahoes are candidates for replacement, as you can see with our scoring sheets. Next slide, please. What to purchase as a replacement? Chief Merrill and I talked about our current and future needs. There's a need for more towing capacity, a need for redundancy for command unit, so they're set up identically, and trouble-free gear and equipment placement for his staff. Then we talked about what is available on the market, and there are no contract pricing currently. We were hoping to bring forward something today, but unfortunately it closed early on 8/18 due to nationwide shortages. I put this screen up here, kind of shows you what we look like when we go to the state contract. We see what's available. We didn't just look for Fords, we looked at the Chevrolets, we looked at Nissan, Titans. There was a bunch of vehicles, but none of them are available. And as you can see in that circle, the nationwide shortage is the reason being. We were going after the Ford F-150 because we were already using Ford 150 for our police department command rig, so we thought we would stay the same. But again, that one closed early on 8/18 for us. We talked about what are some special features that the fire department requires, and the command items include a pull-out tray, specialized tools, including area for their extraction tools. And it needs to be as interchangeable as possible. We talked about, could we use a smaller, more economical vehicle? No. The reason we're going with the truck is we need more space right now as it is. And right now, Chief Merrill tells me that the gear spills over into the Tahoe, taking away passenger space when he needs it. And then we talked about our vehicle equipment from a more centralized motor pool being more cost effective. They are currently using a pickup from the motor pool. That's a third vehicle that they're using. And so by changing these out to be 2 trucks versus 2 Tahoes, he actually can decrease and give us back our motor pool to be used for other purposes, and there save some money for him. And also, it's very hard per RCW to take one of our existing motor pool vehicles, outfit it the way he needs it, and then take it back when we need it. So that's another option, or another reason why we would like to move this direction with the trucks. We talked about multi-use vehicles, if we had any. Currently, there's nothing for this particular need. And then, of course, we talked about EV options. Yes, there is a hybrid option. Yes, there is an all-electric option. Again, none of them are available at this time. So staff discussed these options, and we don't think it's feasible at this time based on usage, and we don't know how it will affect our electrical and operational issues by going all electric and even hybrid at this time. So we're estimating some current replacement costs based on that base price that you saw on that last screen, plus tax. We don't know anything about additions. We don't know what the increase will be. So we're estimating $50,000 for just the vehicle and the basic outfitting that comes with that. And then we talk about the additional outfitting, which is the radios, light bars, trays, striping, or wrapping. And that's another estimated at $20,000. And that's just not the equipment. That's also labor involved, for a total of $70,000 each. Funding, the funds are available in the equipment rental replacement fund. We also would like to stick with the state contract because it fulfills our bidding obligations. The contracts typically open in October and close in spring. That is not happening anymore. There's no rhyme or reason. They open really fast and they close, and they use the word order shutdown. The words order shutdown is imminent. That could be 1 day, that could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months. We just do not know at this time due to distribution. And production is determined by the manufacturer, so the state contracts don't control that. It's Ford, Chevrolet, and a great example of this is we ordered that police department command vehicle back in December of 2021. Ford told us just this last week that they are not putting it in production and that we have to now reorder the 2023 version. They aren't honoring the price. And so now we're waiting for a truck for 8 months now. Now we're going to be waiting for a truck for another 6 to 12 months, if it even gets put into production. And I have never seen this in my 25 years. This is very unusual. I've never had an order cancel like that. And then for them not to honor the pricing. And so it's just, times are just very odd right now. So our proposed action is that we would like to replace the 2 budgeted Tahoes as soon as contracts open, which could be 2022. It could be even 2023. We just do not know at this time. We'd like to bring forward on September 6th that we have a not to exceed amount. So that way, if it does open up in a couple weeks, we're ready to jump on it. If not, then, we just wait until they actually open up. And then we would sell the 2 Tahoes before they cost more to keep them on the road than it's worth. And then those funds would go back into the replacement formula. And I'll open it for questions now.
Councilmember Stuckey.
Maybe it's there, I missed it. What is the age of the current Tahoes that are being replaced?
2004s.
Okay, I thought that was on there. Okay, that's all I was wondering. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question. So what happens if they start to cost more to keep on the road than they're worth and we decide to sell them, but there aren't any new ones on the horizon? How does that affect the fire department?
Oh, correct. We won't sell them until we actually have the other ones here.
Okay, so we don't anticipate being in a position where we are vehicle-less?
No, we couldn't do that feasibly.
I recently purchased a battery-powered skateboard that I can put a light on, and we're good to go.
I've got an e-bike you could borrow, but I don't know how.
Yeah. That would put us in a bind, as Sandra said. And I've worked with Sandra for years and looking at state bids, and I have never, ever seen it this bad. They open up today and tomorrow they're closed, that they just don't have any stock available. We anticipated coming to you with this proposal with the understanding that normally in September, October, November, it opens up, you order, and 3 or 4 months later you have it. And, we had talked about replacing these vehicles a couple of years ago, and we were in the same ballpark as we are today.
Yeah, that's scary. I'm definitely thinking that some sort of blanket authorization, normally we like to keep things pretty prescribed within a certain price, limit and have all of the details. But in this case, council might need to give you a little more leeway than we would normally be comfortable with, because when the opportunity comes open, you're not going to have time to come back at us with questions if things aren't exactly the way we predicted. Yikes.
Yeah, and that's what Sandra and I were talking about previously, was that's what we'd like to get from the council, because if it comes open for a week, we want to be able to jump on it when it's open. And if we can get a not to exceed amount, and we can see what the pricing is going to be, we know what the long-term pricing is going to be on the equipment we need to put in that apparatus. We just need to see the base price of the vehicle. And if we can get the authorization from the council to do that, should one come open, we want to jump on it.
Yeah, it seems like the best course of action to me. Any other comments, questions from council? All right. All right, Chief, so we are, and thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
We are going to move on to our fireworks discussion. Chief.
That would be me. I'm just trying to figure out who the bald-headed guy is up there on the screen. I've never seen me from the backside. You should have. Oh, well, okay, then we'll just discuss. I had all kinds of really cool slides to look at and things exploding and fireworks going off and everything.
One sentence, it says, discuss with council fireworks and direction before.
Okay, so forget the idea of PowerPoints. We'll just have a good discussion. So over the years, we've had off and on complaints about fireworks. As you know, by state law, under the RCWs and under the WAC requirements, the timeframes that we can sell and or discharge fireworks within the city limits. We do match the state requirements where they can go on sale on June 28th at noon until July 5th at 11 o'clock at night. We know the timeframes that we can discharge fireworks. It's not consistent up and down the island. You can't buy or sell or discharge fireworks in Langley. In the town of Coupeville, you can only discharge on the 4th of July. In the county proper, you can only discharge July 3rd to July 5th. In the city, we can discharge June 28th to July 5th, as well as on December 31st. We do get a lot of complaints about noise complaints, concerns for animals, just the inconvenience of fireworks that go on. And we've had emails, we've had Facebook, we've had telephone calls, we've had letters, we've had complaints about fireworks. I will tell you, though, over the last 20 years, we have been very fortunate not to have a lot of fires directly related to fireworks. We've had 2 interior house fires. Both were set by the tenants. One because they seemed to have a little too much alcohol, and they thought it'd be really cool to see these fireworks go off as their house was burning. And one from another reason that we won't necessarily get into, but there was a fire because of it. We've had 2 roof fires, and we've had some grass fires, and we've had 2 vehicle fires. That's over the last 20 years. So our fire loss is not high in comparison to a lot of other places, but there's a lot of inconvenience because of fireworks and the noise and the complaints and the length of time that we allow fireworks to occur. Of course, we like to utilize what's called safe and sane fireworks. There are specific requirements set up by the State Patrol, the Fire Marshal's Office, State Fire Marshal's Office, on the size that the mortars can be, how they discharge the fireworks. The problem that we run into frequently as well, yes, there's 3 fireworks stands in the city. People buy the legal ones. You can go across the bridge and you can buy all kinds of illegal fireworks. M80s, M100s, firecrackers, fire bottle rockets, and the list goes on and on and on. And those tend to be the ones that cause the largest problem, unless you build a sparkler bomb. And if you want to learn how to, I can teach you how to build a really good sparkler bomb that really goes off well. That is illegal, by the way, because it's considered an explosive device. But what I'd like to know is what direction the council would like to go in fireworks. Understand that by the RCW, if we made a change to our fireworks ordinance, there has to be a 1-year lag time from the time that ordinance takes effect. So if we did something December 1st of this year, we couldn't enforce it until December 1st, or December 2nd of next year. So there's a full year's lag time. So whatever we do, if we do anything, will not affect July 4th in 2023. We'd be looking at July 4th, 2024. But we have received a lot of complaints over the years, especially about animals and especially about noise and inconvenience. So all I wanted to bring forth today was a discussion on fireworks and what the council may see or what the council would like, the direction you'd like us to go. I think there could be a lot of discussion regarding fireworks. But we've seen more and more cities really restrict the use of fireworks. But again, the problem we run into, even if we restricted fireworks, you can go across the bridge and buy all kinds of stuff at the reservation and bring it back here. As you may remember, 4 or 5 years ago, the State Patrol set up a really good sting. They had watched the people buy fireworks at the fireworks stand at the reservation, and as soon as they got onto the state highway, pull them over and confiscate their fireworks, having for illegal explosive devices. Haven't done that for 3 or 4 years. I will say I went to the reservation one day, I'm going to tell you right now, and I asked one of the stands, what have you got that's new and different? Well, here, take this, take this, take this. And they just handed me all kinds, and I told them who I was. I said, I'm the fire chief for the city of Oak Harbor, and I'm curious to see what new stuff you have. Just show me. And he goes, no, take it. And they took me out in the lot and discharged it for me. And he says, take it home with you. I did not. I just want you to know that right now. Well, I'm sorry. I did bring a couple things because I do use it for displays. I've got some M80s and some fireworks that I use when I go to the base to show what is illegal compared to what's legal. So, but I'd be happy to answer any questions on fireworks. And I did all that without a PowerPoint. That's all from up here.
Councilmember Stuckey.
Just a thought, because I had a bit of that discussion around that time frame too of the 4th of July on social media. And while there was a couple that said, let's not do it, for the most part, it was more the concern of the time frame. It wasn't so many people that said there shouldn't be allowed fireworks in city limits, which some cities don't allow. It was more tidy up the time frame, maybe not quite as late. So I don't get the impression that this should be a let's not allow it, but I don't think there'd be a lot of objections to a little less time frame.
Yeah, it really starts out, well, you all have probably heard on July, or mid-June, they start shooting off fireworks because the reservation starts selling mid-June. And those are the ones we have trouble with. But I would not be opposed to seeing us reduce the time frame that they can be legally discharged. And of course, the problem we run into is we get a telephone call that somebody's discharging fireworks. By the time we get there, they're all done discharging and you can't find them anyhow. But
Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
I don't want to unnecessarily step in it here because I do sympathize with the the stress that the noise can cause to humans or animals, etc. But I will say this is Oak Harbor, and it seems like quite possibly our really cool city logo could probably be a firework, and people would know that was Oak Harbor. I think being a Navy community, a lot of the guys and gals really like to shoot those fireworks off. Generally I have a hard time with rules or ordinances that are more restrictive than what the state already requires. It's only 1 week a year. That's where I'm at, but I'm only one of 7, and I wouldn't fight council hard on it one way or another.
so I'm only throwing this out for discussion at some point. But if we choose to do nothing, we choose to do nothing. That's as well too.
I have a question, and I apologize, I should have looked this up ahead of time, but what does enforcement look like for fireworks? My issue is if someone is shooting them off and it's July 7th, or they're on what I know to be private property that isn't theirs, or public property where they're not supposed to be shooting it off, and I have that internal struggle about, do I call ICOM? Am I wasting law enforcement's time? Just because it happens to annoy me. And so what does enforcement look like? How much does that cost? Do you have any idea of that?
I don't know off the top of my head as far as what kind of fine there is. What we generally do, when we go out, we just confiscate.
Okay. And
take the fireworks. And then we will get with the bomb squad and either destroy them in one of their bomb squad devices. A few years ago, we would go up to city shops and put them inside of a big concrete vault, put a little bit of diesel fuel in, and blow them up. That was really a lot of fun.
I'd appreciate an invite, yes.
But generally, we just confiscate and not fine. Unless it's a ongoing problem, they just continue to do fireworks.
Councilmember Munns.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Chief, if I'm not mistaken, you can't fire them on federal property.
That's
in
correct.
base housing, so.
Correct.
Looking at the calendar and how the days, instead of 8 days, why don't we just make it a suggestion, July 1st through the 5th? Just shorten it.
And we're open to any of that.
Okay,
And-
I'm just
And
throwing it out
Councilmember
there.
Mullins, you're correct. School district property, city beach, public way, federal housing, federal property, none of that is allowed to be shot. It can only be on private property.
And I remember how well everybody did on when we had the burn ban. And they were in Windjammer Park on the other side of the Dodge dealership.
Yes.
And you just walked up to them and kind of had your hand, and they handed them over, and they didn't, they didn't push hard and got arrested. But I mean, so you guys have worked with the police department and have really done a super job, especially when there's fire burdens. But why don't we just shorten it and see how it goes? And
So I'm
okay,
looking for ideas
I'm
and
just-
suggestions,
okay.
and
I'm just throwing it out.
Yeah, I'd support that. I think allowing them, but having a shorter period of time makes a lot of sense. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So, Chief, if I understand correctly, this is just it's not a public safety thing. It's just a matter of inconvenience for some people, more or less. I mean, is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Marshall, I could go either way.
Yeah.
There is public safety because there is always that potential of whatever's lit off can land on somebody's structure. We've been very, very fortunate.
Okay.
I mean, 2 roof fires. I mean, that's,
Right.
in the last 20 years, that's pretty darn good.
Right.
The fires inside of the structure, they set them, the people that were there did it to themselves. Grass fires, we had a large one last year that took us about 4 hours to fully extinguish. It got into trees, it got behind people's property. It was at a very hard location to get to. We put our firefighters in danger, us and Navy both, because they came out to assist us. The fire was that large.
Okay.
And it took us about 4 hours to extinguish it. So yeah, there could have been a public safety issue there.
Sure.
But overall, we've been very fortunate.
Okay.
And we've been fortunate that there hasn't been a lot of medical incidents due to fireworks. This last year, a young man down in the south end of the island blew his hand off. But that doesn't happen very frequently, which is good.
Right.
But so, I could argue that there is a public safety issue, but by the same token, I could say, well, we don't have a lot of incidents, so it's not that bad. Yes, it is a deterrent and a detractor for animals and people and the scared animals. I know at my house with my 2 dogs, on the 4th of July, my wife takes the 2 dogs into the bedroom, turns the TV up as loud as we can, give them their tranquilizers, and hope they go to sleep and not have a problem.
Right.
The dogs, not the missus. Let me clarify that.
Now, the dates that the fireworks can be sold, those correspond with the dates and times that we can shoot them off, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and so my only concern with shortening the time is I know that some of our civic organizations, like the Rotary, they rely on those fireworks sales as a major fundraiser for what they do, and so I would hate to cut what their ability to fundraise is as well. So that's just something that I would like to consider if we're considering cutting the dates back.
Do the dates of sale correspond with the dates that you can fire them off?
Yes. But,
Oh, they do?
But
Oh.
you could say, we still allow the sales to follow state law from June 28th at noon until July 5th at 9 o'clock at night, but you can only discharge July 1st through July 5th. I mean, other locations in the county have done that. Coupeville, for example, they still follow law as far as sales, but they'll allow the discharge on July 4th.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. I don't want to, because I know those nonprofits and have helped sell some of them, and it is their lifeblood. But, yeah, sell them, but just charge them a few days less.
Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
Yeah, I think Councilmember Marshall brings up a good point that I wasn't even thinking of. I'll take the kid to buy fireworks on the 28th, and it seems like by the 29th we're out. So go buy more fireworks on the 29th. Okay, these have to last until the 4th. Well, they're out by the 3rd. So we end up going to the fire station, or we end up going to the fireworks stand 4 times at least, right? So I think Eric's right. I think it would drastically cut into their sales.
Yeah,
and you know, another thing would be, you know, you mentioned how lucky we were over the last 20 years, and you talked about the two people that did it to themselves by setting it off inside, right? I wonder if by making something illegal, are you forcing the kids to sneak them out and go do more risky things with them? Are you possibly contributing to a public safety thing? A lot of questions on it for sure.
There's a lot of ramifications either way, and there's a lot of things we could do or could not do. And we've had people shoot fireworks off in August and September, so. So just for discussion, we'll see where we go from here.
Sure. Yeah, it might be worth looking into. I might do some research between now and our next meeting about cities that that have either put on additional restrictions or less, and see, you know, what kind of an impact that had on their community, good or bad. It would be interesting.
If you like, I will get you some information about cities and locales within our area, Mount Vernon, Anacortes, Burlington, those areas, and see what their ordinances and requirements are, and get that back to y'all.
I'd appreciate that.
I can do that for you.
I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
All right.
That's all I've got. Thank you.
Anything else before we move to our city administrator report? All right. Thank you very much, Chief. Okay, city administrator's report. Mr. Oborn.
Yeah,
you
good
have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. Oak Harbor City Administrator Blaine Oborn. I was hired in August of 2018, so this is my anniversary month of 4 years with the city. So I think we've accomplished a lot of great things in the city during my time here, and certainly we have a lot of great things we're working on to accomplish in the future. So great team we've been putting together, and so I'm happy to continue my service here. Focusing on my report, some of the things to highlight here, just flying through this fairly quickly. The center, I was able to attend their appreciation picnic hosted by the Senior Services, and great staff on August 5th, and certainly some of the people there were very appreciative of the service and wanted to make sure that I convey that we continue that service. So it's something we subsidize with the general fund, and I think is a great community service that they do in allowing get-togethers and activities for seniors, and certainly that center does a great job in providing those services, so I thank them for that. I like to also impart, I go to training and I like to impart some of the knowledge that I got from that, so I kind of gave you some of the quick highlights that I thought were interesting, and I'll focus on a few of those, not covering on all the ones in my report, but some of the ones I picked up. One thing I want to congratulate is Sabrina Combs was accepted to the prestigious Northwest Women's Leadership Academy, and I kind of explained the goal there. It's certainly a great program and academy that helps develop women into leaders in the field that I serve in. So we certainly have a gap still there, and so this is a way of preparing for that gap. Moving on here, one of the things they talked about was in occupational burnout, and they talked about multitasking and work towards balancing multitask rather than multitasking. I thought that was kind of an interesting quote, because you really can't do three things at one time, but you could go from one task to another. So sometimes you can stress yourself out with trying to do three things. Another kind of thing they talked about was the Great Resignation, and their point was that the Great Resignation is actually the Great Reshuffle. And I think certainly we've been able to capture a lot of great people who've decided to reshuffle their career, and so it's been a great opportunity for us. Obviously, we've had some turnover, but we've been able to bring in some really great people. Moving on to communications, they're doing a great job on staff, and Sabrina and doing the city website. I think it's a real combined effort, and that's coming soon. So great progress there. And then also on the communication is the videos that were produced. I think council gave some compliments on that. Appreciate that. The What's Up with Whidbey Avenue video and the Splash Park video. Great citizen viewing of that and great outreach there. So moving on to human resources, recruitment of the Parks and Rec Director is underway. First round of interviews with 8 candidates is next week on Monday and Wednesday, so I appreciate the 2 council members that are serving on that. Summer picnic is tomorrow. I think most council members signed up for that. And then Public Works, kind of interesting. This has been a long-term thing there with the clean water facility and the fluent dye study. So I remember hearing about that a while back, and there something that was kind of coming, and it's happening now. And then I think I sent out an email there, and this is follow-up in the report here. The future Harbor Heights Parks development is on hold. The costs are just, the estimated costs are too much, and we'll bring that back as we strategize there on how to deal with that and how to go forward. But we went ahead and pulled the grants because the grants were based upon a $5 million, and now we have an estimated cost of 11.5. With that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions, comments from council? Councilmember Hoffmeyer.
First of all, Blaine, on your 4-year anniversary, congratulations. I think the people of Oak Harbor are very fortunate to have you. Secondly, on Harbor Heights, is there, you said it might come back, is that staff would look at some ways to cheapen that up and bring that back to council? Is that the thinking, or?
It's such a doubling. We don't have a plan yet.
Okay.
And I'll probably invoke it'll be something where we're developing the Parks and Rec Director, and we're going to get somebody with some more grant experience and professionalism in that area. So I'm going to lean on them to help us to do that. But I was able to overcome the 1.7 to 5.5, but I just can't deal with that. So we're going to be dissecting it, look at options, and so I shouldn't say it might not come back. It will come back to council, but staff is right now just regrouping and trying to come up with a plan, and it's going to take us a little while to do it. Time frame wise, it's a 2-year cycle, so we missed a cycle unfortunately, and it just basically is pushing back that whole project by 2 years. But I mean, you've talked about other locations. I mean, everything's open. We can look at a different location on the property that might have not as much slope on it, that might be cheaper. And that doesn't even count the $3 to $10 million for an access road is on top of that. So, and we're trying to overcome that issue. So there's more to come on it, but honestly, we don't have a plan B, right? We went to plan B, and now we're trying to plan C, and we just don't have a plan C to go to. So that's why we're just kind of regrouping, and we'll come up with some plans and come up with some options, and come back to council for some discussion, and then see where we go.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough, and probably a great idea to lean in on the future Park and Rec Director. Maybe, I mean, gosh, so that with the access road, that would put it close to 15 million for phase 1. That is that's baffling. There is a need, but I think you're right. I think nobody would support it at that cost. Maybe that's a nice piece of property. Maybe there's a way to start with opening it up for some type of other uses. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments for our city administrator? Okay, at this time, we will move into executive session. At this time, council will take a short break and then enter into executive session to discuss potential litigation. The executive session is expected to be 15 minutes. No action is anticipated.
I would say it's going to be less than that. I'd give us 10.
10 minutes? Okay, Hillary?
At most.
All right. 10 minutes, and no action is anticipated upon return to open session. Executive sessions are not open to the public, so we'll take a 2-minute break, enter at 5:10, and we'll be back out by 5:20. Ish.
Yeah, thank you for doing the math there.
All right, we are back from executive session. No action was taken in executive session, no decisions were made, and we don't anticipate any action being taken now in open session. Are there any final comments, questions from the council, anything for the good of the order before we adjourn? All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Motion by Stuckey, second by Marshall. All in favor, raise your hand. Oh, I know you really want to stay. All opposed? All right, that looks like it passes unanimously. We are adjourned.